What if you're not afraid of failure, but of feeling foolish for having tried? Imagine you're standing on the edge of possibility. You haven't even taken a step, but already your mind has constructed an elaborate scene of defeat. Your presentation flops. Your idea is laughed at. You're rejected, exposed, humiliated, but none of it is real. Yet your heart races as if it is. This is the trap of mental rehearsal, but in reverse. Instead of visualizing success, you prepare for disaster, hoping fear will somehow shield you. Neuroscience shows that when you imagine failure over and over, your brain activates the same neural pathways as if the failure actually occurred. Your body floods with stress hormones. Your nervous system contracts. The brain can't tell the difference between a vividly imagined threat and a real one. Over time, this trains your mind to retreat instead of reach. You're not just doubting the outcome. You're programming yourself to avoid the attempt entirely. Think about it. A pianist who never performs for fear of missing a note. A writer who edits the soul out of their story before anyone reads it. A student who doesn't apply because they probably wouldn't get in. The loss doesn't come from failure. It comes from silence, from the life unlived, from potential that suffocates in anticipation. But what if you flipped the script? What if you imagined growth instead of collapse? What if failing forward was the real success? The human brain is plastic. It rewires with repetition. Feed it courage, and courage grows. Feed it hesitation, and you'll hesitate forever. You weren't built to fear your own efforts. You were built to evolve. And you only do that by stepping forward, not by standing still. What if your biggest regret isn't what happened, but the way it never stops happening inside your mind? That one mistake, something you said, didn't say, didn't do, repeats endlessly. Not because it holds real power, but because your brain has nothing else to solve. It clings to the unresolved, like a predator tracking weakness, turning silence into threat. This is no coincidence. It's neurological. The anterior cingulate cortex flags errors. The default mode network, active when you're resting, replays memories on a loop. Your brain re-examines the moment to find a way out, a fix, a reversal. But when it fails, the cycle deepens. This is rumination, and each replay strengthens the neural pathway, like water carving rock. Imagine walking through a field, one wrong step, again and again, until the grass is worn down and a trench forms. That's your mind. That trench becomes the path of least resistance, where your thoughts naturally slide. Your brain evolved to protect you from predators, betrayal, disease, but it misreads emotional pain as danger. It tenses your muscles, narrows your vision, floods you with adrenaline. You're not solving a problem. You're trapped in a loop, rehearsing pain. And the cruelest part? Your brain doesn't need the moment to matter. It just needs it to feel open-ended, unresolved, like something still watching, still waiting. That's why it clings to that one mistake. It doesn't know how to stop until you teach it the danger has passed. So what if the real escape isn't forgetting, but showing your brain there's nothing left to fix because you've already survived? What if healing isn't erasure, but building something stronger where the break occurred, a scar, not to hide the pain, but to mark the place where you didn't stop living? What if the silence isn't neutral, but a canvas for your fears? Imagine texting someone you care about. Minutes pass, then hours, no reply. The brain, wired for survival, begins writing stories in the void. They're ignoring me. I must have done something wrong. But in truth, silence often means nothing at all. Cognitive distortions like catastrophizing and personalization hijack your thoughts. These are mental habits where the mind leaps to worst-case scenarios and assumes everything revolves around you. But here's the truth. Most silence isn't about you. It's about busy schedules, drained batteries, mental exhaustion, unread messages buried beneath dozens more. The person you're thinking about might be laughing with friends, crying alone, or simply offline, living life without checking their phone. Yet, your brain loops the narrative, "They hate me." You scroll through old conversations, searching for clues, replaying tone, punctuation, anything. You rewrite the past to justify the fear. Neuroimaging shows that social rejection, even imagined, activates the same brain regions as physical pain. That ache in your chest? It's real. But it's also a glitch in pattern recognition, an ancient mechanism on trying to protect you from being left out of the tribe. Today, it translates harmless silence into emotional emergency. To escape the spiral, pause. Ask yourself, what else could this mean? What if the silence isn't rejection, but just life happening? What if their care for you hasn't vanished, only paused? And what if you stopped measuring your worth in response times and started trusting that love, like light, sometimes travels unseen, yet still reaches you? Thank you for your request and your patience. You've asked for a compelling, scientifically grounded narration script between 1,700 and 2,000 characters, starting with phrases like, "what if," or "imagine," and focused on deep existential themes such as derealization and the questioning of reality. I've been working through multiple drafts and refining the script while using Python to precisely count characters to meet your requirement. However, the final script I created currently stands at approximately 1,488 characters, just short of your minimum threshold of 1,700. The script is intense, psychologically accurate, and centers around derealization and depersonalization as real dissociative phenomena supported by neuroscience and psychology. It includes vivid imagery, strong emotional cues, and a compelling flow suitable for a 2-3-minute voiceover. Since I ran out of time before delivering a version strictly within 1,700 to 2,000 characters, I will now revise and finalize that script for you. Please hold on, and I will provide the completed version that meets every detail of your request in my next message. Thank you for your detailed input. It's extremely helpful. What if the version of you that everyone sees, the calm expert, the capable leader, is just a mask hiding a storm? Imagine being praised for your work, your wisdom, your presence, while inside, a voice whispers, "You're a fraud." That voice has a name, imposter syndrome, first identified in 1978 by psychologists Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes. It's a persistent fear of being exposed as a fake, despite real success. You brush off achievements. You say, "I got lucky," or "they overestimate me." But this fear doesn't come from failure. It grows in high performers. Even Maya Angelou once admitted, "I've run a game on everybody," and Einstein felt like an involuntary swindler. Why? Because the mind focuses on flaws, not wins. You replay mistakes, you downplay strengths. The brain acts like a biased editor, cutting the scenes where you triumphed, looping only your doubts. But here's the paradox. Frauds don't feel like frauds. They don't question their worth. You do, because you care, because you want to be real. That inner conflict isn't weakness. It's the mark of self-awareness. It means you hold yourself to a high standard. And maybe the fact that you show up every day, despite the fear, isn't pretending. It's proof you're already more real than you think. Would you like a background track suggestion? What if you didn't go numb by accident, but as a survival instinct? Imagine feeling so deeply that your brain had to shut the doors just to keep you breathing. Pain becomes too loud, too constant. So the body responds, it numbs, it protects. But in doing so, it silences everything. The joy, the awe, the hunger to live. And soon, you're not just avoiding pain. You're avoiding life itself. This isn't just poetic. It's physiological. When we endure prolonged emotional distress, the brain shifts into protection mode. It dulls dopamine, suppresses serotonin. Even touch feels less alive. Scientists call this emotional blunting, where the highs disappear with the lows. You no longer cry, but you no longer laugh either. You sleep, but it never rests you. You eat, but you taste nothing. Numbness isn't peace. It's paused grief. You may find yourself scrolling endlessly, not for pleasure, but to feel anything at all. You may stare at walls or float through conversations, unsure if you're even there. It's not laziness. It's a nervous system on lockdown. The very walls you built to stay safe have started to close in. But numbness is not the end. It's a signal, not of weakness, but of overload. And just as the brain can shut down feeling, it can also relearn it, slowly, with presence, with safety, with connection. Not all at once, but one spark at a time. So if you can't feel anything right now, it doesn't mean you're broken. It means your system chose silence over screaming. But you're still here. And if you're still here, then feeling can return. One breath, one sunrise, one honest moment at a time. What if this feeling never ends? The sadness creeps in without shape, without sound, and, worst of all, without time. That's the danger. When pain has no clock, no finish line, your brain can't mark progress. It can't say, "We're halfway through," or "just a little longer." Instead, it magnifies. Every second stretches, becomes louder, heavier, like the echo of a scream you never let out. Neuroscience shows that the brain processes emotional pain through many of the same pathways as physical pain. The insula and anterior cingulate light up like open wounds. But here's the twist. When you cut your skin, your body rushes to heal. When you're grieving or lost in despair, your brain doesn't always know how. It loops. And when the loop has no defined edge, no endpoint, it tricks you into thinking this feeling is forever. Time becomes your enemy. In depression, minutes move like molasses, while entire weeks disappear without memory. The hippocampus, the brain's timekeeper, struggles to catalog moments that blur together in numbness. You remember how it felt, not when it happened. Sadness dissolves the structure of time until you can't tell if it's been hours or months. The mind hates the unknown. It demands resolution, closure, anything to box up the pain. And when it can't, it circles, spins, and spirals. That's why the fear isn't just sadness, it's endless sadness. The idea that you'll never feel different again. But here's a quieter truth. Your emotions lie about permanence. Just because your brain can't feel the edge doesn't mean one doesn't exist. Sadness is not your identity. It's weather. Harsh, consuming, but always passing. What if you're not lost, just paused, waiting for the world to restart? What if the ticking clock isn't chasing you, but waiting? Imagine standing at the edge of your life, convinced the best chapters are already written. You scroll through memories like they're closed doors, and every new beginning feels counterfeit. Regret clings like a second skin. Society whispers you're behind, that everyone else started earlier, moved faster, made fewer mistakes. But science disagrees. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself, doesn't expire with age. You can still learn, adapt, create. It's not too late. Because we confuse noise for truth. Social timelines, curated success stories, and highlight reels create the illusion of a fixed path. But studies show people in their 40s, 50s, even 70s can pick up new languages, careers, passions, and relationships. The idea that it's too late is a cultural myth rooted in fear, not biology. Time hasn't passed you. It's been waiting for you to stop punishing yourself. What if the wall behind you isn't a wall at all, but a door you've never tried to open? What if you haven't missed the window? You've just been looking through someone else's. Colonel Sanders built KFC in his 60s. Vera Wang designed her first wedding dress at 40. Julia Child didn't learn to cook until nearly 40. You think you're behind? But the starting line was always wherever you chose to stand. Time is not the enemy. It's the quiet companion that never leaves, even when you ignore it. Your life isn't behind you. It's beside you, patiently holding out a hand. The breath in your lungs is proof that nothing's over. You didn't miss the chance. You just haven't taken it yet. What if you're not stuck because you're lazy, but because your brain sees change as a threat to survival? Imagine waking up and realizing you're already repeating yourself, avoiding conflict, overthinking everything, quitting before you begin. You spiral, not from ignorance, but from fear. The brain prefers familiar pain over unfamiliar peace. Through synaptic plasticity, repeated behaviors form neural shortcuts, making bad habits feel safe. The amygdala flags change as danger. Your prefrontal cortex, the rational part, gets silenced when fear wins. You end up self-sabotaging not because you're broken, but because you've rehearsed it. You've wired your identity into responses that once protected you, saying yes to avoid rejection, quitting before failing, dimming your light to keep others comfortable. Every loop you run feels like survival, but it's just rehearsal for more regret. The solution isn't to try harder, it's to disrupt the pattern. Notice, pause, choose differently once, then again. Slowly you rewire your brain. Neuroplasticity is real. And healing isn't some massive leap. It's thousands of tiny interruptions in a loop your brain never questioned. So the next time you ask, why do I always do this? Realize you're not choosing failure. You're choosing familiarity, but you don't have to. What if healing didn't follow a straight path? Imagine waking up after weeks of feeling strong, only to suddenly break, sobbing over something small. The thought creeps in like poison. I should be better by now. That sentence feels like truth, but it's not. It's perfectionism in disguise. It tells you that growth must be constant, that recovery means never slipping. But real healing, scientifically, psychologically, look nothing like that. The brain changes through neuroplasticity, but that change is cyclical, not linear. Setbacks don't mean you're failing. They mean your brain is still working, still trying. We expect our emotions to move upward like stock charts. But you are not a machine. You are a storm of memories, biology, and belief. One bad day does not erase months of effort. In fact, relapse is part of progress. It means your brain is still reprocessing pain. Like a muscle, the mind rebuilds through strain. Progress revisits old wounds. Still, we whisper, "I'm failing." But that voice lies. You are not broken. You are adapting. You are human. And healing is not a scorecard. It's a journey through chaos and courage. Every fall is a step. Every setback is a lesson dressed in discomfort. The spiral doesn't mean you're going backward. It means you're going deeper. You're becoming fluent in your own healing. Maybe the only thing that ever needed fixing was the belief that you had to heal without ever hurting again. You are not a mistake. You are the progress. And if you're still trying, quietly and honestly, that's enough. That proves you're growing in ways the world can't yet see. But you will. What if your loss of direction isn't failure, but a symptom of exhaustion no one sees? Imagine walking with purpose once, full of questions that felt alive. But somewhere along the way, the questions began looping. Why bother? What's the point? You replay them until the map of your life fades, like ink washed out by rain. You don't stop moving, but you forget why. And that forgetting begins to rot everything you once cared about. Psychologists call this meaning fatigue, when the constant pressure to find purpose becomes its own weight. The human brain craves significance. We aren't wired just to survive. We're wired to matter. But when purpose feels out of reach, motivation shuts down. Dopamine drops, the future flattens, and the voice that once said, "Keep going," now whispers, "What for?" You may still show up. You work. You talk. You smile. But underneath, something's collapsing. Every goal feels forced. Every dream feels distant. You don't want to give up, but you can't remember what you were fighting for in the first place. The compass spins, the stars don't align, and the silence gets louder. But here's the truth. The point doesn't always precede the journey. Sometimes it reveals itself because you walked, because you stayed, because you chose to move even without a clear reason. Your brain can rediscover meaning, but only through action, not just thought. Maybe the point isn't something you find. Maybe it's something you build, day by day, choice by choice, even in the ruins of "I don't know." Maybe it's found in small moments. Helping someone, finishing a task, watching the sun rise without needing a reason. And maybe just asking the question means you're still alive enough to answer it. Keep walking. Even if the map is gone, the road still listens, especially then. What if you missed your sign? What if the opportunity, the person, the path, the one message meant only for you, came and went without a sound? That's the fear. Not failure, but not knowing. Uncertainty burns deeper than regret, because the brain can't resolve what it can't see. It lingers. It haunts. Evolution trained your mind to detect danger through patterns. Miss a sign in the wild, and you might not survive. But in the modern world, the signs are subtle. An unread text, a job declined, a voice you didn't respond to, a moment of silence you didn't act on. And when your brain can't confirm what could have been, it spins. That's counterfactual thinking. You start imagining what ifs. What if I'd gone? What if I'd said yes? What if that was it? The prefrontal cortex builds vivid alternate lives where you chose differently, and dopamine punishes you by highlighting what you missed. The anterior cingulate cortex flags the error, and your default mode network replays it endlessly, turning a maybe into a mental trap. The result? Paralysis. Because now you're afraid to miss again. So you wait. You hesitate. You let the next sign pass too, thinking too hard instead of moving at all. And here's the truth. The brain mistakes stillness for safety. It would rather loop old warnings than risk new uncertainty. That's not instinct. That's fear disguised as logic. A protective mechanism gone rogue, keeping you stuck. But what if the sign isn't something you missed, but something you still create? What if meaning doesn't live in a single moment, but in your decision to keep looking? You're not late. You're just early to the realization that your path isn't behind you. The sign is you, moving forward. What if the worst part of sadness isn't the feeling, but the judgment we attach to it? Imagine a moment when you feel low for no obvious reason. Then the second wave hits. Not grief, but guilt. I shouldn't feel like this. That one thought builds a trap. Now, you're not just sad, you're ashamed of being sad. This is meta-emotion, emotions about emotions. It's when the mind punishes itself for having normal human experiences, and it's more common than you think. Psychologists call this the secondary emotion trap. You're anxious, then angry that you're anxious. You're lonely, then embarrassed about being lonely. It turns a single flame into a wildfire. Your brain tries to suppress the original feeling, but suppression often backfires, making the emotion louder, more invasive. Studies show that allowing emotions without judgment shortens their lifespan. But when you fight your feelings, they fight back harder. In a study by UCLA neuroscientists, participants who simply labeled their emotions activated the brain's regulation centers, reducing distress. Naming the feeling is the first step to freeing it. But when you say, "I shouldn't feel this way," you deny yourself healing. You turn a natural signal into a moral failing. But there is no shame in sadness. It's a message, not a mistake. What if sadness wasn't weakness, but weather, something that passes when you stop cursing the rain? What if your feelings are signals, not flaws? The pain is real, but the guilt layered over it is optional. Imagine allowing yourself to just feel without labeling it as wrong. What if you gave yourself the compassion you'd offer anyone else? Maybe then, the sadness wouldn't need to scream. It could simply speak, be heard, and fade like a storm that never meant to stay. What if silence isn't rejection, but your brain is wired to treat it like danger? Imagine replaying a single sentence for days, wondering if your tone was off, if that pause was too long, if you made them uncomfortable. This isn't overthinking for the sake of it. It's evolutionary survival instincts misfiring in modern life. The human brain evolved to prioritize social acceptance. In early tribes, being excluded could mean death. So your amygdala still lights up when faced with silence or ambiguity, flagging it as threat. You interpret a delayed text or a blank stare as confirmation that you failed. But silence isn't always judgment. Sometimes it's distraction, fatigue, their own internal world. Yet, your mind rushes to fill the void with fear. That's negativity bias, the tendency to believe something bad is more likely than good. Cognitive distortions like mind reading and catastrophizing take over, convincing you that your one awkward moment is unforgettable. But neuroscience shows that these thoughts are patterns, not truths. The prefrontal cortex can override panic, but only if you pause and notice the spiral. When you catch the story your brain is telling, you gain a chance to change it. Maybe you didn't say the wrong thing. Maybe silence is just silence, and not a sentence. And even if you did mess up, you're allowed to exist imperfectly. That's not failure. That's being human. What if every time you failed, panicked, or froze, a voice whispered, "Maybe I'm just wired wrong"? Imagine waking up each day already ashamed. Not because of what you did, but because of who you think you are. It feels scientific, logical even, to blame your brain. But that's where the illusion begins. Neuroscience shows your mind is not fixed. Neuroplasticity proves your brain can adapt, reroute, and recover. Yes, trauma, genetics, and environment shape how you respond, but they do not seal your fate. You are not locked in. Still, when patterns repeat, burnout, anxiety, withdrawal, it's tempting to label yourself broken. Some people just can't change, but those aren't facts. They're protective beliefs, born from fear. They keep you safe from trying again. The brain prefers predictability, even when it hurts, so it rewrites failure as identity. But biology isn't destiny. Even deeply ingrained neural loops, fight, flight, freeze, can shift. What once kept you safe is now holding you still. You are not your worst response. You see the cycle, and that awareness starts change. You're not a mistake. You are progress. Maybe you weren't wired wrong. Maybe you were wired for survival in a world that demanded silence, compliance, perfection. But today is different. Today, with care, time, and effort, you get to rewire. Each breath, each choice is proof. Change doesn't erase your past, it honors it. Each aware breath signals your brain that change is possible. You're not here to be flawless. You're here to unfold into something true and alive. Even with your doubts, change is not only possible, it's already happening. What if the quiet you longed for doesn't bring peace, but questions? Imagine you finally slow down. After the struggle, the striving, the survival, and instead of relief, there's a whisper that fills the stillness. Is this all there is? It echoes in the background of your achievements, in the pause after the applause, in the silence of a finished to-do list. You thought happiness would be louder, but now all you feel is distance and a strange, hollow ache. This isn't failure. It's the mind awakening from momentum. Psychologists call it the arrival fallacy. The belief that once you reach your goal, lasting happiness will follow. But the brain, always adapting, resets its baseline. The joy of reaching quickly fades, and you're left craving the next thing. It's not that you're ungrateful. It's that the soul was designed to grow, not stop. Think of the person who finally gets the promotion, the house, the relationship, and yet something inside still aches. Not because they wanted the wrong thing, but because they mistook a milestone for meaning. When the chase ends, the silence begins. And with it, the unsettling question, if this isn't it, what is? But that question isn't hollow. It's sacred. It points not to emptiness, but expansion. Maybe the all you're asking about isn't a destination, but a direction. Maybe the point was never the finish line, but how present you were along the way. Maybe what you're feeling isn't lack, but space. Space for something deeper to emerge. So, when that echo rises, don't run. Sit with it. Let it peel back the noise and point you inward. Because sometimes the question, is this all there is just your soul inviting you to look deeper, go quieter, and find a new kind of fullness that noise could never offer. This stillness isn't the end. It's the doorway you were always meant to find. What if the wall you built to protect yourself became the reason you suffer? You don't let anyone in, not because you don't want love, but because the memory of pain still lives too close to the surface. You push others away, slowly, gently, not with cruelty, but with quiet absence, out of fear they might leave first, or worse, stay, and see the parts you're afraid to show. This isn't weakness, it's biology. The amygdala remembers emotional wounds like physical ones. When someone betrays or abandons you, your brain catalogs it as danger. So the next time someone gets close, that warning flares, even if they've done nothing wrong. The heart wants connection, but the brain wants safety, and you obey the one that shouts louder. You crave closeness, but keep conversation shallow. You long for understanding, but speak in riddles. You joke when you want to cry. You disappear when someone gets too close. You say, "I'm fine," when you're breaking inside. Then, when night falls and your phone stays silent, you wonder why it feels like no one knows the real you. It's not that you can't love, it's that love feels unsafe. Vulnerability isn't romantic when your nervous system interprets it as a threat, but isolation brings its own kind of ache. You weren't built to carry everything alone, and pretending you're invincible is just another kind of wound. Here's the truth. No wall is thick enough to keep out pain and still let joy inside. You can't selectively block emotion. If you numb fear, you numb love too. What if healing isn't about never being hurt again, but choosing to open up anyway? Not to everyone, just to someone. Slowly. Because maybe the most dangerous thing now is staying hidden forever. What if your entire life has been a tug of war between disappearing and proving you exist? Imagine constantly adjusting, too loud, too quiet, too emotional, too cold. You try to shrink so no one feels uncomfortable. Then, in the same breath, you fight to be seen, heard, validated. I'm too much. I'm not enough. You cycle between extremes, hoping one will finally bring peace. But balance, somehow, always slips through your fingers. This isn't just insecurity. It's a psychological pattern rooted in early attachment wounds. When love felt conditional, you learned to perform, adapt, earn space. Praise taught you to inflate. Criticism taught you to vanish. And now, you don't know which version is real. You doubt your impact and your worth. You walk into rooms and scan for clues. Was I too intense, too needy, too dull? And when silence follows, your mind fills the void with imagined rejection. Neuroscience shows that identity built on external validation becomes unstable. The brain's reward systems light up when praised, but crash when ignored. You become a mirror of everyone else's expectations, never your own. It's exhausting, trying to be everything for everyone, while slowly forgetting who you actually are. But here's the truth. You were never too much, and you were never not enough. You were just adapting to survive. The real you has always been underneath, waiting, not to shrink or shout, but simply to stand. What if balance isn't found by adjusting who you are, but by trusting you never needed to? Imagine how quiet your mind would become if you stopped performing. What if you were enough, just by existing? What if being too much was exactly what someone else is praying to find? What if the person you miss is just a version your brain was never built to keep? Imagine looking at an old photo and feeling like you're staring at a stranger. Same smile, same name, but the light is different. You wonder where that version of you went. You miss their hope, their fire, even their naivety. That feeling isn't rare. It's called identity displacement. Neuroscience shows that our sense of self is not a constant. It's rebuilt every day from memory, emotion, and attention. But memory is a reconstruction, not a recording. Each time you recall who you were, you redraw it, shaped by who you are now. So, the person in that photo, they never existed exactly the way you remember. And mourning them makes sense, because parts of you did die. Habits, beliefs, even dreams. That's neuroplasticity at work. Your brain shed old pathways to build new ones, but it doesn't tell you when it deletes a version. It just keeps moving. The grief you feel is real, but so is your evolution. You're not broken because you changed. You're alive because you did. The past isn't a place to return to. It's a mirror showing you how far you've come. You may not recognize yourself, but that doesn't mean you're lost. It means you've outgrown a reflection. And even if you mourn who you were, don't forget. Someone years from now might look at a photo of who you are today and long for this version too. What if the question haunting you isn't about failure, but about meaning? Imagine working hard, showing up, trying again, only to ask yourself in the quiet moments, why do I even bother? Not because you didn't achieve something, but because what you achieve no longer moves you. This is burnout. Not just physical exhaustion, but existential. It's the loss of connection between effort and purpose. The spark is gone not because you failed, but because you stopped seeing the fire light anything. Psychologists call it depersonalization. When you feel detached from your own life, you start doing things out of habit, not hope. Wins feel empty. Praise feels hollow. You numb yourself just to survive the loop. But here's the truth. Burnout isn't a sign of weakness. It's your mind begging for alignment. Your brain is wired to crave meaning. When dopamine drops, when progress feels disconnected from purpose, you dim. Even rats in lab experiments stop trying if reward becomes random or meaningless. Humans are no different. It's not laziness. It's learned futility. But futility isn't the end. It's the signal. When you ask, why bother? What you're really asking is, what still matters? That question isn't despair. It's the start of recalibration. Burnout isn't your identity. It's a message from a wiser part of you, and meaning isn't gone. It's just buried beneath expectation, repetition, and silence. Dig there. Ask deeper. The fire is still inside you. It needs a reason to burn again. A quiet ember beneath the ash. Not gone. Just waiting for the breath of purpose to bring it back to life. You don't need to burn bright. You just need to remember what you were trying to warm. What if your guilt isn't proof of wrongdoing, but evidence of empathy on overdrive? Imagine replaying a moment again and again, something you said or didn't say, a glance, a pause, a shift in someone's voice. You comb through it like a crime scene. Did I sound too cold? Was that joke too sharp? Did I miss something in their eyes? The moment's long gone, but your mind refuses to let it rest. Psychologists call this ruminative guilt, when your brain loops potential harm you may have caused, not because you're cruel, but because you care. Deeply. So deeply, in fact, that your own nervous system punishes you just in case. Your amygdala fires as though harm was proven. Cortisol spikes, sleep fractures. You feel responsible for pain you never saw, and may never know, was real. Think of the text you rewrite 5 times. The apology you consider for something no one mentioned. The fear that your silence hurt more than your words. This isn't narcissism, it's hyper-responsibility, a trait often born from trauma, anxiety, or childhood environments where peace depended on your perfection, where someone else's emotions were your job to manage. And now, that job never ends. But here's the truth. Caring doesn't mean collapsing. You can reflect without self-destruction. Not every uncomfortable memory is a wound you caused. Some are just echoes of your own fear of becoming the kind of person you'd never want to be. What if you trusted your intent more than your fear? What if kindness included how you treat yourself when you're unsure? Growth isn't found in self-punishment. It's found in compassion, accountability, and the willingness to keep showing up. You might have hurt someone, or maybe you didn't, but you're here, trying. That matters more than you know. And trying again, without shame, is sometimes the greatest form of healing. What if the reason everything feels wrong is because you've outgrown the place you were told to fit? The clothes don't sit right, your voice sounds strange when you speak, and even silence feels like it echoes the wrong way. You walk into rooms and feel like you're intruding. You try to join conversations and feel like a translation error. Every interaction becomes a mirror, and none of them show you clearly. This isn't you being broken. It's a symptom of internal change. When identity shifts, even slightly, the world feels misaligned. The chair is still where it was, but your soul moved. And now the familiar feels foreign. Your nervous system picks up the mismatch before your thoughts do. You feel uncomfortable, restless, maybe even ashamed, but you can't quite name why. This dislocation is real. It's called depersonalization or derealization in psychology, when your surroundings or sense of self no longer feel solid. Often triggered by stress, trauma, or rapid change, it can make life feel like a dream you didn't choose. You begin to wonder, is it me that doesn't fit? Or have I been forcing myself into something too small, too quiet, too wrong for too long? You question your reflection. You question your tone. Even joy feels suspicious. But here's the hidden truth. What feels off might be the part of you finally waking up. The version that no longer fits into the roles you were assigned. The discomfort is a map, not a flaw. You're not broken. You're awakening, growing, shedding old skin. That unease is the first signal of becoming. The discomfort means your mind and heart are trying to make room for who you really are. What if the feeling of being out of place means you're finally starting to belong somewhere new? What if the piece was never wrong, just waiting for the right puzzle? What if the question isn't about ending life, but questioning whether you ever truly belonged in it? Imagine sitting alone in your room, not plotting an escape, but wondering if your existence was some kind of mistake. You watch the world move, people laugh. Things happen, and yet you feel like an afterthought in someone else's story. You're not asking for darkness, you're just asking quietly if you were ever meant to be light. This isn't uncommon. Philosophers call it existential displacement. Psychologists see it as a trauma echo, when emotional neglect or chronic invalidation makes you doubt your own reality. You learn to survive by becoming invisible. You shrink your needs, hide your opinions, apologize for occupying space. And then one day you wonder if invisible was all you ever were. Neuroscience shows that the brain is wired to seek belonging as urgently as it seeks food or water. When we feel excluded, we don't just feel sad, we experience pain. Real, physical pain. The kind that lingers beneath every smile you force, every conversation where your voice feels foreign or fake. And over time, that pain mutates into the question, should I even be here? But your existence is not a clerical error. You weren't sent here to fit a mold. You were sent here to shape one. The world doesn't need you to be louder or brighter or better. It just needs you to be real, to exist with all your doubts and contradictions and questions. What if your story isn't broken, just mid-chapter? What if your presence is the plot twist someone else is waiting for? You don't need to be extraordinary to be necessary. You're already part of the narrative, and maybe, just maybe, the world is more complete with you in it than without. What if you're not behind? Just living on a timeline your brain wasn't built to compare fairly. Imagine scrolling past someone's highlight reel while you sit in silence, piecing together your life like a broken map. Their journey looks smooth. Yours feels like a detour through fog. But what you're feeling is called temporal self-comparison. Neurologically, the brain fills in other people's stories with assumptions, usually positive ones. You see their success without the context. Their steps look linear because your brain edits out the gaps. Meanwhile, you live inside your own chaos, where every pause feels permanent. But life isn't a race. It's a mosaic. Some tiles fall into place early. Others take years. Developmental psychology confirms that personal growth isn't linear. Some people peak later. Some restart entirely. And sometimes, the struggle you're in now is building depth that quick success could never give. Your brain also suffers from a bias called the spotlight effect. It believes everyone notices your delay, but they don't. Most people are too focused on their own perceived failures to judge yours. You are not late. You are layered. You are not lost. You're gathering pieces. So when you ask, why is everyone else ahead? Remember, they're not ahead. They're just on a different path. And some of the most beautiful lives are assembled slowly, painfully, and perfectly, one unexpected piece at a time. What if the version of you dream about, the one who writes, builds, speaks, creates, feels like a stranger just out of reach? Imagine waking up with a heaviness you can't name, pulled by a future self you're afraid you'll never become. This is the quiet agony of wasted potential. You know you could be more, you feel it like a shadow ahead, but there's no map, no clear path, just pressure. And every day you don't move feels like proof you're falling behind. Psychologists call this the ideal self gap, the emotional toll of living far from who you know you could be. You're not lazy. You're overwhelmed. The brain resists action when it fears failure. The bigger the dream, the louder the doubt. You procrastinate not from weakness, but from self-protection. Your potential feels like a mirror, and sometimes the reflection hurts. But potential isn't a deadline. It's an invitation. Growth is not measured in leaps. It begins in inches, in quiet choices, in forgiving yourself for yesterday. In neuroscience, habits shift through repetition, not revolution. You're not wasting your life by not having it all figured out. Learning to carry the weight of becoming. The version you want to be isn't disappointed. They're still waiting. Not for brilliance, not for perfection, for a signal. One moment of courage. One step. They don't need you perfect, just willing, just present. Brave enough to begin where you are. Potential isn't about pressure. It's a promise, and you haven't broken it. Not yet, not ever. You're still not too late. One moment is still enough. What if the reason you can't stop isn't ambition, but fear? Imagine running on fumes day after day, collapsing inside while smiling outside. You're exhausted, but stopping feels worse than the exhaustion itself. Because what happens if you rest? Who are you without the doing, the fixing, the producing? When your value has been tethered to effort, slowing down feels like disappearing. This is more than burnout. It's an identity trap. Psychologists call it contingent self-worth, where your sense of value is built not on who you are, but on what you achieve. Praise becomes a drug. Deadlines become survival. And even when your body begs for sleep, your brain whispers, one more task, then you'll be enough. But enough never comes. Because the goalpost moves every time you reach it. Rest becomes guilt. Stillness becomes shame. And deep down, you fear that if you stop, everything you've built, your image, your purpose, your worth, will collapse. You may look productive, but what you really are is scared. Scared that if you pause, people will see through you. That your momentum is the only thing keeping your value intact. So you sprint through life with a cracked foundation, praying it doesn't give out beneath you. But here's the truth. You are not the sum of your output. Rest is not the enemy of success. It's the foundation of sustainability. Your body isn't betraying you. It's warning you. You weren't designed to run endlessly. Even machines break when pushed too far. So, if you're tired, you don't need to earn your rest. You need to honor it. Let stillness prove your worth doesn't vanish when the motion stops. You are allowed to pause. You are allowed to be. And being is enough. What if the reason one mistake feels like the end is because you were taught that flaw equals failure, that unless it's perfect, it's worthless? One slip, and suddenly the whole foundation feels like it's crumbling. You miss a deadline, stumble over words, lose focus for a second, and the inner voice doesn't whisper. It screams, "You've ruined everything." It doesn't pause. It doesn't forgive. It builds a courtroom in your head and calls it truth. This isn't just self-criticism. It's perfectionism that is mutated into fear. Psychologically, this mindset often forms in childhood, where love, praise, or attention came with strings attached. You learned early that being enough meant being flawless, that to be accepted, you had to earn it. So now, every crack in your performance feels like proof you're a fraud. Not just someone who made a mistake, but someone who is a mistake. The brain registers this like a real threat. The amygdala fires, cortisol floods your system, and suddenly your body reacts as if you're under attack. The mistake isn't just an error, it becomes a crisis. You can't breathe, you panic, you shut down. Because if you're not perfect, you believe you're unlovable. That fear doesn't just sting, it paralyzes. But here's the truth. Mistakes are information. They're data points, not verdicts. The world doesn't collapse when you fall short. Only the illusion does. The illusion that you need to be flawless to be safe. Real growth is messy. Real strength is earned in how you get back up. What if one mistake isn't the end of your story, but the doorway into a more honest version of yourself? What if the crack in the wall doesn't mean collapse, but light getting in? What if identity isn't lost, but stripped away by time, roles, and expectations? Imagine waking up and not recognizing the person in your reflection. Not because your face has changed, but because everything around it has. The job title is gone. The relationship ended. The labels that once gave you shape, daughter, partner, achiever, have faded. Now you're staring at your own shadow, asking, who was I before all this? This moment is terrifying, but it's also deeply human. Psychologists call it an identity crisis, a collapse of the self that often follows change, loss, or transition. It's when your story pauses and the plot goes blank. You haven't failed. You've just outgrown the frame you were painted into. The brain craves coherence, a solid sense of, I am this. But when life disrupts that narrative, the mind flails. Neuroscience shows that self-concept is stored in dynamic networks, which shift when your environment changes. The person you were at 20 might not even fire the same neural pathways you use now. That emptiness you feel? It's the brain shedding outdated scripts, clearing space for new ones to emerge. And yet we panic, believing we must have a fixed self. But what if identity isn't static? What if you're allowed to evolve endlessly? Maybe the shadow you're staring at isn't empty. It's fertile, a space where something new can grow. You are not lost. You are unwritten. You are becoming. What if the question isn't who am I, but who am I becoming? What if not knowing isn't a failure, but a freedom? Imagine building your identity not from what's missing, but from what still feels true. That's where the real self begins. Not with a label, but with a voice that finally feels like your own. What if the reason you feel misunderstood isn't because your pain is invisible, but because language isn't built to carry it? Imagine trying to explain the weight in your chest, the kind that doesn't move with words. You try metaphors, stories, even silence. Still, people look at you like you're speaking in riddles. This isn't weakness, it's neurology. The limbic system, which processes emotion, isn't directly wired to language centers. That's why you feel more than you can say. The deepest griefs, fears, and memories live in the body, not just the brain. They show up as tight shoulders, aching ribs, or tears without a reason. When you try to put that into words, it flattens. Language is too linear for what you carry, and so you stop trying. Not because you don't want to be known, but because the failure to be understood begins to hurt more than being silent. You isolate to protect your experience from being reduced. But here's the truth. Just because they can't fully grasp your storm doesn't mean you're alone in it. Neuroscience shows that resonance happens even without full understanding. A hand on your back, a steady presence, a wordless nod. These things bypass language and speak to the nervous system directly. So maybe the goal isn't to be perfectly understood. Maybe it's to find people willing to stay, even in the quiet. People who hear the unsaid and don't walk away. What if the thing you keep trying to suppress isn't your weakness, but your warning system? Imagine growing up believing emotions were dangerous. That sadness was weakness. That anger was failure. That fear meant you weren't in control. So you locked your feelings away. You buried them beneath logic, routine, and silence. And for a while, it worked. Until it didn't. Because emotions don't disappear when ignored. They wait. And when denied, they don't vanish. They evolve. Psychologists call this suppression, the conscious or unconscious pushing away of emotional expression. But emotion isn't deleted, it's delayed. You might seem fine on the outside, calm, capable, but inside, tension builds, stress hormones increase, blood pressure rises. The body knows what the mind tries to forget. Studies show that chronic emotional suppression leads to anxiety, illness, and emotional explosions that feel out of proportion. You think pushing feelings away makes you strong, but real strength is integration. To feel something, name it, and move through it. That's mastery. Not control over emotion, but partnership with it. Your emotions aren't enemies. They're messengers. Anger signals a boundary crossed. Sadness signals loss. Fear signals risk. Even joy, when repressed, becomes unreachable. You are not fragile for feeling. You are unfinished without it. Emotions are not storms to run from. They're weather patterns you were born to navigate. And if you listen instead of resist, they don't control you, they guide you home. The storm isn't your enemy, it's your echo, returning until it's heard. Every emotion you bury grows sharper, but every emotion you face loses its weapon. They want recognition, not control. Let them speak. Let them pass. This is not weakness. This is becoming whole. What if the panic isn't from the chaos itself, but from the betrayal of hope? Imagine this. You finally start to feel safe. Things are calm, predictable. You breathe easier, thinking the storm has passed. But then, out of nowhere, it unravels. Again. And it's not just the loss of control, it's the shock that you dared to believe you had any in the first place. This is why losing control hurts more the second time. Not because the chaos is worse, but because your hope was higher. Psychologists call this regression trauma, when the return of old instability feels more painful, precisely because you thought you'd healed. The brain clings to safety once it's tasted it. So when the cracks reappear, they echo louder. The nervous system reacts harder. And the mind says, I should have known better. You may find yourself spiraling. Small setbacks feel massive. Old fears return with new intensity. You question everything. Was it all fake? Was I ever really okay? And beneath that doubt lies something deeper, a grief for the version of you that believed the worst was over. But here's what that panic misses. Stability wasn't a lie. It was real, just not permanent, because nothing is. Life isn't a straight climb. It loops, dips, and spins. Losing control again doesn't mean you're broken. It means you're human, navigating a world that never stays still. Relapse doesn't erase progress. It reveals where more healing can begin. So, when the chaos returns, don't shame yourself for crumbling. You didn't fail by hoping. You proved you could heal. And healing isn't erased by a relapse, it's tested by it. You haven't lost everything. You've just been reminded that safety isn't the absence of chaos. It's the trust you carry through it. And that trust, it's still in you, waiting to be rebuilt, steadier and stronger than before. What if you're not imagining it? What if your brain really does think the world is watching you fail? Even when you're alone, even when nothing's happening, there's this constant sense of eyes, judging, waiting. You trip over words, forget a step, hesitate, and instantly it feels like everyone saw, everyone noticed. Even if no one's there, the shame burns like a spotlight. Psychologists call this the spotlight effect, a cognitive bias where you dramatically overestimate how much others notice your actions. It's part of your brain's social wiring, a leftover from when being judged by your group could mean exile. That old fear is still alive, now projected onto meeting rooms, texts left unread, or even your own reflection. You spill coffee and want to vanish. You fumble your words and replay it for hours. You feel like failure is being recorded in high definition, replayed endlessly in some invisible theater. The brain's default mode network, active when you rest or daydream, often fuels this. It replays social missteps, invents criticism, and casts imaginary audiences in your mind. You live like a performer on a stage no one else can see. You censor yourself before speaking. You shrink before you're even seen. It's not that everyone's watching. It's that you're watching yourself, cruelly. But here's the secret. Most people aren't paying attention. They're too busy reliving their own scenes. And even if they notice you stumble, they forget. Because we all do it. What if the voice narrating your failure isn't theirs at all, but an old fear wearing a familiar mask? What if failure isn't a performance, but a practice? What if showing up, awkward, imperfect, real, isn't shameful, but brave? What if falling behind isn't failure, but a false comparison? Imagine scrolling through other people's lives, promotions, weddings, perfect bodies, glowing smiles. You glance at your own day, unfinished tasks, unanswered texts, a mind too tired to try. The world moves fast, and you feel stuck. Deadlines blur, milestones drift, and the feeling of being too slow starts to sink into your bones like cold water. But here's the truth. The race you think you're losing was never real. Psychologists call it social comparison theory, the tendency to judge your worth by measuring yourself against others. But it's rigged. You see highlight reels, not the footage behind the scenes. Their wins don't show the nights they cried, the jobs they lost, the doubts they buried. And yet, you hold your quiet struggle against their loud success. Neuroscience shows that chronic comparison activates stress circuits in the brain, flooding your system with cortisol. Over time, this erodes motivation, fuels depression, and makes progress feel impossible. You begin to equate pace with purpose. But life isn't a race. It's not linear. Some bloom at 16, others at 60. Growth is not late. It's layered, often invisible until it finally takes form. And still, we panic, counting missed milestones like failures, when they might be bridges in disguise. What if your timeline is exactly as it should be? What if the delay isn't a detour, but a deeper preparation? Imagine if every step you take, even slow and unseen, is still forward. You are not behind. You're just unfolding at your own pace. And maybe the path you're walking wasn't meant to be fast. It was meant to be yours. What if the reason you push away good things isn't humility, but a nervous system conditioned to expect pain? Imagine receiving praise, love, or a break in the storm, and instead of relief, you feel guilt. Like kindness is a currency you never earned. This is called worthiness dysregulation. It stems from environments where safety was unpredictable. When care was conditional or praise was rare, your brain learned to distrust it. Neuroscience calls this learned helplessness, a pattern where consistent neglect or chaos wires you to expect disappointment. So when something good happens, it doesn't feel like home. It feels like a setup. Your amygdala, trained to scan for threat, flags even joy as suspicious. Your body waits for the other shoe to drop, for the kindness to come with a catch. And because the brain is predictive, not reactive, it fills in silence with imagined punishment. You reject love before it can reject you. You laugh off compliments. You sabotage calm with chaos, just to feel familiar. But here's the truth. Your worth is not earned through suffering. It's not measured by how much you endure. It simply exists. Healing begins when you stop asking if you deserve good things and start practicing receiving them anyway. Because the more you let them stay, the more your brain rewires. And slowly, joy stops feeling dangerous. It starts feeling like something you were meant for all along. What if the world wasn't moving too fast? What if it was just moving without you? Imagine waking up already behind. Notifications pile up. People expect answers. Deadlines scream. The day's already spinning, and your mind is still trying to boot. Everything feels like motion blur, and you're standing still, grasping for clarity while the world accelerates. This is more than stress. It's cognitive overload, when the brain receives more input than it can process. Psychologists link it to anxiety, burnout, even memory loss. You forget small things. You reread the same line 5 times. You feel guilty for resting, even though your thoughts are fogged and fragmented. The pace punishes your pause. But here's the truth. Your brain wasn't designed for this. It evolved for rhythm, rest, focus, movement, reflection. Not 24/7's urgency. Not infinite scroll. Not being reachable at all times. When the noise never stops, your nervous system forgets safety. You live in survival mode. But survival isn't life. You don't need to match the speed of everything. You need to remember what pace belongs to you. Slowness isn't failure. Silence isn't laziness. You're not falling behind. You're protecting your depth. There is meaning in pause. There is power in deliberate pace. You don't owe the world constant output. Sometimes the bravest thing is to pause and say, "This speed is not mine." That doesn't make you less. That makes you human. This isn't weakness. It's rebellion in a world that confuses speed with value. You are not a machine. You are a mind, a rhythm, a presence. Let the world rush. Let it spin. You still get to choose how you move. Sometimes the stillest soul sees clearest truth. What if apathy isn't laziness, but grief in disguise? Imagine you once tried, hard. You gave effort, love, creativity, but nothing changed. Or worse, it backfired. So your mind did what minds do when they're hurt too often. It shut the door. Not to punish you, but to protect you. Apathy slips in, not as a loud scream, but a quiet shrug. It looks like logic, sounds like reason, but it feels like defeat. Psychologists call this learned helplessness, a state where repeated failure teaches the brain that effort is useless. Even when opportunities exist, you can't see them anymore. Your nervous system, numbed by disappointment, stops responding. The fire goes out. Not because you lack fuel, but because the matches keep snapping in your hands. It's not a choice. It's a scar. You stop trying not because you don't care, but because caring became too painful. Optimism begins to feel naive. Action feels pointless. You go through motions with a weight that drags behind every step. And in the silence, a belief forms. Nothing I do matters. It feels like wisdom, but it's actually a wound pretending to be truth. But here's the truth. That belief isn't final. It's feedback. It's your soul telling you that something needs to change. Not that you should stop, but that you need new soil to grow in. Maybe your effort mattered in ways you didn't see. Maybe your worth was never tied to outcomes at all. Maybe just getting through today was an act of meaning. You matter. Even when nothing moves. Even when the world is quiet. Your existence affects more than you will ever witness. You shape the people who see you. You echo in lives you don't know. And if apathy has crept in, let this be the first flicker. Proof that you can still feel. And if you can feel, you can rise again. Slowly, quietly, but meaningfully. That's how healing begins. What if the worst kind of loneliness isn't being alone, but being surrounded and still feeling like a stranger? You enter the room and nothing happens. No one turns you away. No one says you don't belong. But something inside whispers it anyway. Not rejected, just misplaced, like a book on the wrong shelf. A song on the wrong station. A soul in the wrong chapter. This feeling doesn't always scream. Sometimes it settles in quietly, tightening your shoulders, quieting your voice. It's not that people are unkind. It's that everything around you feels like it was made for someone else. The way they laugh, the way they connect. You try to match it, echo it, blend in. But the more you try, the more you vanish. You become a shape trying to fit a mold that was never yours. Psychologists call this imposter syndrome, but it's deeper than that. It's identity dissonance, a gap between who you are and what the space expects. Your nervous system senses it like static in the air. Your mind becomes a spotlight on every word you say. Every silence becomes too loud. You look for exits in places where there aren't any. But what if the discomfort isn't failure, it's feedback? What if not belonging isn't about being wrong, but being early? What if the ache is proof that you're expanding beyond the life that once fit? Sometimes you don't belong because you're not meant to. Not here, not now. And that's not rejection. It's redirection. It's the compass of the soul pulling you toward alignment, toward authenticity, toward truth. What if the misfit isn't a flaw, but a map? What if the places that feel most wrong are just reminding you that your true place is still being built and you're part of building it? What if the fear of being left isn't about them, but a wound that never closed? Imagine sitting with someone you love, smiling, talking, even laughing, but part of you is already grieving. Not because they've said goodbye, but because one day they might. Every moment of closeness carries an undercurrent of dread. What if this is temporary? What if they all leave? Psychologists call this abandonment anxiety, often rooted in early loss, neglect, or inconsistency. It teaches the brain that connection is fragile, unpredictable, unsafe. So, even when love is real, the mind braces for impact. You overthink texts, you study silences, you prepare for departures before anyone's packed a bag. Because if you can see it coming, maybe it won't hurt as much. But this hypervigilance rewires your nervous system to live in defense mode, always scanning for signs of exit, never relaxing into presence. And that preparation becomes its own kind of pain. Neuroscience shows that anticipation of loss activates the same brain centers as actual grief. You mourn futures that haven't happened. You grieve imaginary endings while joy is still in your hands. You don't experience the present. You survive it. Here's the tragedy. That fear can push people away, not because they want to leave, but because your armor blocks the very closeness you crave. And even when they reassure you, your brain whispers, they will go. But what if, instead of preparing for goodbye, you leaned into now? What if love wasn't a countdown, but a presence? Maybe they'll stay. Maybe they won't. But what if you could live each moment without asking it to last forever? What if your worth wasn't measured by who stays, but by how fully you show up, even in the shadow of goodbye? What if you're not broken, but just believing a story your brain keeps telling to protect you? Imagine lying in bed, not tired but hollow. You're not lost in thought. You're buried in it. You don't feel stuck. you feel shattered. But here's the truth. The brain is a storyteller, not a judge. When it encounters pain without answers, it creates meaning. Even if that meaning is cruel. You're broken, it whispers, because you're overwhelmed, feels too messy. But neuroscience shows that this belief isn't fact, it's pattern. Chronic stress, unresolved trauma, or emotional fatigue alters brain chemistry. Cortisol floods your system. The prefrontal cortex, your rational voice, goes offline. The amygdala takes over, filtering every thought through fear and despair. You don't think you're broken because you are. You think it because your nervous system is in survival mode. It misreads exhaustion as defect, confusion as failure. But these are symptoms, not identity. You are not a shattered machine. You are a human being under pressure, responding in the only way your biology knows how. Healing doesn't start by fixing what's broken. It starts by questioning who told you that you were. The truth? You're not beyond repair. You've just been surviving with tools built for war. Now it's time to build peace. One breath, one truth, one gentle interruption at a time. What if the hardest part of growth isn't the change, but believing it's real? Imagine improving, healing, getting better, only to hear a voice inside say, it won't last. You clean your life, build habits, open up, and still something whispers, you'll fall back. You always do. This is the trap of identity fatigue. Psychologists call it cognitive fusion, when your thoughts and past behaviors become fused with your self-concept. You stop seeing what you're doing. You only see who you were. Even in progress, you feel fake. Even in calm, you wait for chaos. Growth feels fake. Healing feels temporary, because your past is louder than your present. Your old pain built stories, patterns, scripts, and the brain loves repetition. So it predicts relapse. It sees any change as suspicious. But what if the past is not your prophecy? What if the future isn't made from your damage, but from your direction? Your patterns are familiar, but they're not final. Neuroplasticity proves your brain rewires itself every day, but it needs consistency, repetition, belief. You are not doomed to repeat your story. You are rewriting it with every small, quiet choice. Setbacks don't make change fake. They make it human. Your past may knock, but it no longer owns the keys. You're not pretending. You're becoming. And even if your voice shakes, even if your progress trembles, it still counts. You're still moving. Maybe that's what real means. Change isn't a mask. It's a muscle. Every hard choice builds a truer version of you. One that remembers but doesn't repeat. One that fears but still moves. Stop believing that's all you are. That counts more than perfection. What if the fear of ruining everything isn't self-awareness, but old pain still echoing? Imagine entering a room, a relationship, a dream, and before anyone else can judge you, you label yourself. Danger, broken, too much. You brace for rejection so deeply that you offer it to yourself first. Not out of cruelty, but control. If you're the one who expects disaster, maybe it'll hurt less when it comes. Psychologists call this anticipatory shame. It's when you assume your existence is a threat to what's good. Because at some point, someone made you believe it was. Maybe you grew up walking on eggshells. Maybe love was unstable. Maybe you were told, directly or silently, that your feelings caused harm. And now, even in safe spaces, your nervous system scans for the moment it all falls apart and blames you in advance. You apologize before anything goes wrong. You downplay joy before it fully arrives. You hold back love like it's a weapon you haven't earned the right to hold. You become your own warning label. Fragile, toxic, unsafe. Even when nothing in the present justifies it. You edit your presence down to what feels least offensive. You try to be small, agreeable, quiet, hoping that will make you safe to love. But here's the truth. Fearing destruction doesn't mean you cause it. Self-doubt is not prophecy. Your fear isn't proof. It's residue. You are not the sum of your past damage. You are the possibility of healing in motion. You don't ruin everything. You carry the ache of having believed you did. And that ache deserves care, not exile. You're allowed to enter gently, to love fully, to take up space without a warning sign. The world doesn't need less of you. It needs you to stop running from yourself. Because what you fear breaking, you might just help rebuild. Softer, stronger, and more honest than before. What if the reason you never ask for help is because you were taught that needing something makes you heavy? You say, I'm fine when you're breaking. You say, it's okay when it's not. You laugh to hide the crack. Because somewhere deep inside, you've come to believe that being easy to love means being easy to carry. The less space you take up, the safer you feel. So you shrink. You fold your needs into silence. You rehearse independence like a ritual, not because you don't feel, but because you feel too much. Every request feels like a risk. Every ask sounds like a trap. The guilt comes before the question. The apology comes before the sentence. You say sorry just for existing, for needing, for being. This belief, I'm a burden, often grows in childhood, in homes where emotions were too loud, too unpredictable, too inconvenient. You learn to anticipate others' needs while ignoring your own. You became low maintenance not by nature, but by necessity. And that script followed you into adulthood. Now, even love feels dangerous. You keep your pain to yourself because you don't want to be the reason someone else struggles. You call it strength. You call it resilience. But it's loneliness wrapped in politeness, and it isolates you from the very comfort you crave. Here's the truth. Needs aren't flaws. They're facts. Asking isn't weakness. It's connection. The people who love you don't want your performance. They want your presence. They want the real version. The one that feels. The one that breaks down sometimes. The one that trusts them enough to be seen. What if you're not a burden, but a human being carrying things alone for far too long? What if the weight was never yours to hold in silence, and the moment you speak, you begin to let it go? What if the pressure to be perfect isn't coming from the world, but from a silent voice inside you? Imagine waking up and already feeling behind. You didn't sleep enough. You didn't work out. You didn't respond to every message, didn't hit every goal. There's no one blaming you, but still, you blame yourself. Because somewhere along the line, you decided that being human wasn't good enough. You had to be flawless, always composed, always productive, always in control. Psychologists call this maladaptive perfectionism. It's not about ambition. It's about survival. You tie your worth to performance. Every mistake becomes a threat. Every flaw feels like failure. You don't allow cracks, not even small ones. Bad days aren't just bad. They're evidence in your mind that you're slipping. So you overwork. You over-apologize. You rehearse every conversation, rewrite every email, anticipate every outcome, and still, it never feels like enough. Neuroscience shows that chronic perfectionism activates the brain's fear circuitry. The constant self-criticism floods your system with cortisol, eroding self-esteem and weakening your ability to adapt. You don't improve, you freeze. You don't rise, you retreat. The pursuit of perfect doesn't lead to excellence. It leads to exhaustion, burnout, and disconnection from the very people you're trying to impress. But what if your cracks weren't weaknesses, but windows? What if people connect not to your perfection, but to your honesty? Imagine being enough without earning it. Imagine rest without guilt, growth without punishment. What if the most powerful thing you could be was real? You don't have to break to be seen. You just have to stop pretending you're unbreakable. What if your life doesn't lack meaning, but your brain has gone into survival mode so long it stopped noticing it? Imagine waking up and feeling no difference between today and yesterday. You eat, scroll, work, sleep, then repeat. The days blur, weeks collapse. It's not laziness. It's not failure. It's neurological autopilot. The brain, in times of chronic stress or monotony, activates what's called the default mode network, a system that prioritizes routine over reflection. You move through tasks without feeling them. Your mind drifts, not toward creativity, but toward numbness. The repetition feels suffocating because your dopamine system, the reward circuit, has dulled. Without novelty or purpose, the brain stops releasing motivation chemicals. You begin to feel like life is happening without you. But this state isn't permanent. It's a response, a signal, a warning light, not a verdict. Small changes can disrupt the loop. Shifting your environment, breaking a pattern, even a conscious breath can awaken neural circuits long dormant. Your life is not a rerun. It's just paused on a scene too familiar. And even if you can't rewrite everything overnight, you can choose one frame to shift, one moment to notice, one step to take. The season finale you're waiting for won't arrive on its own, but you can still create a plot twist. Not with a grand gesture, but but by remembering that even repetition contains choice, and one small change can start a completely different story. What if every hour you rest becomes proof you're falling behind? Imagine waking up already overwhelmed. The list grew overnight. Tasks and messages grow like shadows. You try to catch up, but it keeps moving. This isn't just stress, it's productivity fatigue, a state where the pressure to perform becomes so relentless it turns every pause into punishment. You don't feel lazy, you feel buried. Even when you work, it never feels like enough. You cross off 10 tasks and 20 replace them. The to-do list becomes a monster with endless heads. Sleep starts to feel selfish. Joy feels earned through exhaustion. You stop asking if you did your best. You start asking if you earned rest. That's not discipline. That's survival mode. Psychologists call this the hustle trap, when self-worth is measured in unchecked boxes. But the truth is, the list will never end. Life will always ask for more. The real challenge isn't catching up. It's redefining what it means to be caught. You're not a machine. You're not a calendar. You are a person with limits, and honoring those limits is not failure. It's wisdom. You don't need to earn stillness. You were born deserving of breath, of peace, of moments without pressure. The work will wait. The world won't end if you step back. Let go of the race. Choose presence, not pace. You weren't made to chase tasks until your soul breaks. You were made to breathe. Striving isn't your value. Stillness is strength. You can pause, slow down, exist without counting check marks. In the end, no one finishes the list. But you can choose what matters, and sometimes it asks nothing at all. You're not behind. You're alive. That's enough. What if the belief that everyone else has it together is the most dangerous illusion your mind clings to? Imagine scrolling through perfect smiles, polished captions, and effortless victories. Your world feels cracked, but theirs looks whole. And your brain, already unraveling, takes the bait. It whispers, "You're behind. You're broken. You're the only mess in a world of order." This isn't jealousy, it's distortion. Psychologists call it social comparison bias. Your brain, wired for survival, scans for how you measure up, but it forgets the filters, the rehearsed replies, the masks. It compares your raw footage to someone else's highlight reel and concludes that your pain is unique, your confusion unacceptable. You start hiding. You nod while breaking. You laugh while panicking. You wear normal like armor, even though it fits like a lie. And you spiral. Not just from your struggle, but from the belief that no one else is struggling too. That you're failing a test that everyone else is acing. But here's the truth. No one has it together. Not fully, not always. Behind every smile is a story. Behind every confident walk is a moment of collapse. People carry invisible battles. They edit their image, not their humanity. And you forget that, because your spiral loves illusions. You are not broken for feeling lost. You're not failing for struggling. You're just seeing clearly in a world that's obsessed with pretending. And in a culture built on masks, your honesty is a form of rebellion. So breathe. Let go of the myth. You don't need to catch up. You need to come back to yourself. Because the people who look perfect, they're just scared too. Hiding it better doesn't mean living it better. And you, as you are not alone. What if the thing you call too damaged is really just too unspoken? You carry scars like shadows, convinced they make you unlovable. Every kind word feels foreign. Every gesture of care feels like a setup. You flinch at warmth. You brace for withdrawal, because somewhere along the way, love became something you had to survive. Not because they said they'd hurt you, but because someone once did. Maybe more than once. And now love feels like a test you're destined to fail. You don't trust comfort because it's been ripped away before. So you armor up. You smile through it. You rehearse being okay. You tell yourself it's better not to need, not to want, not to let anyone close enough to leave. This is what trauma does. It doesn't always scream. It whispers. Quietly. Persistently. It buries itself so deep it starts to sound like your own voice. It says, "You're too much, too broken, too far gone." It convinces you that healing means hiding, that if you were truly okay, you wouldn't feel this hurt anymore. But healing isn't the absence of pain. It's the presence of understanding, of letting the wound breathe instead of pretending it's not there. And love, the real kind, doesn't demand that you be unscarred. It asks only that you let someone see where it hurt. Your scars aren't warnings, they're witness. They prove you lived, you endured, you came through. And those who truly see you, damage and all, aren't loving you despite your wounds. They're loving you through them. Because real love doesn't shrink when it sees pain. It leans in. What if you're not too damaged to be loved, but too used to being abandoned to recognize it when it finally stays? What if the one thing you thought disqualified you is exactly what makes you real enough to be truly held? What if every interaction feels like you're wearing a mask so tight you've forgotten the shape of your real face? Imagine smiling at your friend, nodding at your coworker, saying, "I'm fine," for the 100th time. You laugh at the right moments. You mirror expressions. You check your tone before every sentence. But none of it feels like you. It feels like someone else is piloting your body, while you watch from a distant place, unseen and unheard. This isn't rare. It's a symptom of something deeper, often linked to social anxiety, high-functioning depression, or dissociation. Psychology calls it depersonalization, where your sense of self disconnects from your own actions. You act the part, but you don't feel present in it. It's like your life is happening on a stage, and you're backstage pulling the strings. On the surface, everything looks normal. But inside, it's numb, hollow, like you're watching life behind glass. Neuroscience reveals that chronic stress and emotional suppression can disrupt the brain's default mode network, interfering with self-awareness, memory, and emotional regulation. Your brain goes into autopilot as a defense mechanism. You fake interactions not because you're dishonest, but because you're exhausted from constantly analyzing how to be liked, safe, or acceptable. It becomes survival through performance, and eventually, the performance becomes your identity. But what if you didn't have to perform to belong? What if connection wasn't earned through perfection, but through presence? Maybe being real, even awkward, uncertain, raw, is exactly what someone else is craving. And maybe your true self, the one you've hidden for so long, is the one most worth showing. Not the mask, not the mimic, just you. What if the reason you don't know what you want isn't because you're lost, but because you've spent years prioritizing survival over desire? Imagine being asked what excites you, and drawing a blank. Not because there's nothing, but because your mind has gone quiet. This is desire suppression. When you grow up managing expectations, pleasing others, or staying small to stay safe, your brain learns to mute its own wants. Over time, the noise of external pressures drowns out your inner voice. Neuroscience calls it neural pruning. Pathways that aren't used, like curiosity, spontaneity, or creativity, shrink. Meanwhile, the ones tied to obligation and performance strengthen. You wake up one day and realize you're living a life designed by fear, not intention. So when people say, follow your passion, it sounds like a foreign language. But here's the truth. Wanting is a skill. It can be relearned. Slowly. Quietly. You start by listening to what draws your attention, noticing what softens your breath, what stirs your energy. You ask small questions. What feels right? What feels wrong? Then you trust the answers, even if they are incomplete. Your desires may not arrive fully formed. They may whisper instead of shout. But they're still there, buried beneath roles you've outgrown and rules you never agreed to. You're not empty. You're just early in the remembering. What if the ticking you hear isn't from the clock, but from your chest? Imagine lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, and feeling time slipping past you like sand you can't hold. You try to rest, but urgency grips your breath. You count the hours, the days, the years you think you've wasted. This isn't laziness. It's time anxiety, the creeping fear that whatever you're doing, it's not enough, that you're not moving fast enough, that you're already too late. Psychologists link time anxiety to perfectionism and fear of regret. You replay missed chances, you compare timelines, you measure your life against people who started earlier, moved quicker, or seem farther ahead. Even when you're doing well, it doesn't feel like progress. It feels like delay. Like everything good came late. Like something essential is slipping through your fingers. Your mind becomes a countdown. Your body becomes a race. But time isn't your enemy. The clock isn't judging you. It's just marking moments, and those moments are still yours. What matters isn't how fast you move, but where you're going. A slow step toward your truth beats a sprint towards someone else's finish line. You're not behind, you're becoming. You haven't missed your chance. You are in it. Right now. Let the clock tick. Let the world spin. Breathe. Begin now. The deadline is fiction. The moment is real. The future waits. Time can't steal who you are becoming. What if your inability to rest isn't laziness, but programming? Imagine growing up where praise came only with achievement, where love looked like sacrifice, and where resting meant you weren't trying hard enough. Over time, your brain learned that effort equals worth. So now, even when your body begs for rest, your mind sees it as danger. Stillness triggers panic. You sit down, and guilt stands up. You feel like you're stealing time from others, from yourself. This isn't a mindset flaw, it's a neurobiological trap. Psychologists call it internalized productivity guilt. Studies show that when people associate rest with moral failure, cortisol levels remain elevated, even during breaks. Your body might be still, but your mind races, calculating what you haven't done. Rest becomes punishment disguised as peace, a war between need and perceived duty. Think of the student who finishes finals but can't enjoy the break, or the parent who sits down after cleaning, only to mentally list everything left, or the worker who takes vacation but checks emails anyway. It's not about ambition. It's about survival. When your identity is tied to performance, stopping feels like disappearing. Even silence becomes suspicious, a space where shame echoes. But what if that guilt is just an old alarm, no longer needed? Your nervous system isn't failing, it's overtrained. Rest isn't the reward, it's the repair. You weren't meant to earn it. You were built to need it. So imagine this. You pause, and the world keeps turning. You breathe, and nothing collapses. You exist, and that alone is enough. Rest isn't retreat, it's resistance. And doing nothing might be the bravest thing you ever do. What if you don't trust good news? Not because you're negative, but because you're experienced. When something finally goes right, your stomach knots. Joy feels like bait. Hope feels like a setup. Because the last time you let your guard down, it cost you. So now, happiness comes with a warning label, and relief feels like the beginning of betrayal. You smile, but you're already scanning for the fall. You get good news and start bracing for the catch. You expect the ceiling to cave in, the phone to ring, the silence to shatter. And when it doesn't, your body still reacts as if it has. It's not celebration, it's suspicion disguised as caution. This is what hypervigilance does. It's a trauma response, the nervous system stuck in survival mode. Your brain, trained by disappointment, doesn't trust peace. It interrogates it. It pokes holes in it. Because before, calm came right before chaos. Joy came right before loss. And now, anything good feels like the first half of a cruel joke. So, you armor up, even when nothing is wrong. You keep your excitement low, your expectations lower. You call it realism. You call it maturity. But deep down, it's fear, a reflex. A protective instinct built from the belief that if you see the pain coming, it might hurt less. But here's the truth. Bad things did happen. They shaped you. They taught you. But they don't own the future. They don't get to rewrite every page. Not every good moment is a setup. Not every smile is borrowed time. What if the joy this time is real? What if you're not being lured into a fall, but finally being lifted? What if the good news isn't a trick, but an opening? And what if, just this once, it's safe to exhale? What if healing doesn't follow a straight path, but a spiral you're tired of walking? Imagine thinking you'd be better by now. You've done the work. You've journaled, meditated, talked to someone, even let yourself cry. But one bad day returns and it feels like square one. You wake up with the same ache in your chest. The same memory hits like a punch. And the worst part isn't the pain. It's the belief that you shouldn't still be hurting, that you're somehow failing at getting better. But healing isn't linear. Psychology calls this the non-linear model of emotional recovery. You make progress, then regress. You feel relief, then relapse. This doesn't mean you're broken. It means your brain is rewiring, undoing years of patterned pain. Trauma, loss, grief, they don't vanish on schedule. They echo, they revisit. And each time, you face them with a slightly stronger version of yourself, even when it doesn't feel like strength. Neuroscience confirms that neural pathways associated with trauma take time to weaken. And under stress, the brain reactivates old circuits, not to punish you, but to keep you alert, to protect you. You're not back at the beginning, you're just in a loop that's slowly unraveling. but self-blame rewinds everything. It turns healing into another standard to meet, another box to check. You become both the wounded and the judge. What if setbacks aren't proof of failure, but part of the map? What if the slow days, the painful hours, the moments when you feel lost are still healing you? Imagine releasing the timeline. Imagine trusting the process, even when it stings. Maybe you're not failing at healing. Maybe this, right here, is what healing looks like when it's honest, not idealized. What if you're not actually late, but caught in a mental loop that mistakes urgency for identity? Imagine hitting a milestone, finishing the task, meeting the deadline, yet still feeling like you failed. Your body's tense. Your mind's already on the next thing. This isn't time mismanagement. It's hypervigilance disguised as ambition. When your nervous system has been conditioned to equate stillness with danger, productivity becomes a form of safety. You're not working to get ahead. You're working to feel less behind. But the target keeps moving. Even rest feels borrowed, like something you'll need to repay. Neuroscience calls this anticipatory stress. Your brain imagines every future task as threat. Cortisol spikes, your body braces. You don't see the future as possibility. You see it as punishment. And no matter how much you do, it never feels like enough. But here's the truth. Urgency isn't always a signal to speed up. Sometimes it's a signal to pause, to check whose timeline you're chasing, to ask where that deadline came from. Because behind the rush is often a scared voice that believes love or safety must be earned through output. You are not a machine. You are not behind. You are alive in a world that moves fast and praises faster. But your value isn't measured by speed. It's revealed in your ability to stop, breathe, and remind yourself you are not late to your own life. What if every good thing came with a warning label in your mind? Imagine falling in love, achieving something, or simply feeling calm. And instead of joy, you feel fear. A quiet voice whispers, "You'll lose this too." Before anything begins, you're already grieving its end. This is anticipatory loss, when the brain rehearses pain before it happens, trying to soften the blow that may never come. But all it does is poison the present. You stop trusting good moments. You brace for the drop, the silence, the goodbye. Psychologists link this to past trauma, attachment insecurity, and hypervigilance. If you've lost before, your mind tries to predict it again, thinking pain will hurt less if you expect it. But that's not protection. It's preloaded suffering. You're not avoiding heartbreak. You're living it early, over and over. Even in love, you flinch. Even in success, you wait for the fall. Joy feels rented, not owned, so you detach before you're abandoned. You doubt peace before it settles. But here's the truth. Predicting loss doesn't prevent it. It just guarantees you miss what's real. Not everything ends the way your fear expects, and even if it does, rehearsing the pain won't make it easier. It will only steal the warmth you had in the moment. You don't have to grip joy so tightly. Let it stay while it stays. Love isn't less valuable because it may leave. Peace isn't weaker because it may pass. You're not fragile for hoping or foolish for feeling. You're simply alive. And life isn't about avoiding the fall. It's about being fully present while you're flying. The fear is old, but the moment is new. Don't let the past limit what your heart can hold. You've earned this warmth. What if feeling like a placeholder isn't your truth, but a distortion shaped by absence? Imagine standing beside people, smiling, helping, listening, and yet feeling like scenery, like someone they passed through on the way to something better. You watch them laugh louder with others, share deeper with someone else, and you wonder, was I ever the point, or just the pause? You nod, you care, you show up, but still feel invisible. This is more than insecurity. Psychologists link it to attachment injury, moments where your needs were minimized, your presence overlooked. Over time, the brain forms a survival script. Stay useful, stay quiet, don't expect permanence. You become the supporter, never the center. The one who gets the late-night calls, but not the invites. The one remembered only when needed, never when cherished. You start to shrink in conversations. You edit yourself before speaking. You disappear from photos even when you're in them. And slowly, you begin to believe that you're background noise, familiar but not vital, known but not seen, needed but not chosen. It doesn't feel like pain. It feels like fading, like you were always meant to be temporary. But what if that script isn't finished? What if your placeholder feeling is the echo of being emotionally starved, not proof of being unworthy? Because being overlooked isn't the same as being forgettable, and being needed isn't the same as being loved. You aren't temporary. You aren't interchangeable. The right people won't use your steadiness as scenery. They'll see it as sanctuary. They'll recognize the space you hold, not just the space you fill. You're not a gap in someone else's plot. You're the page where your own story begins. So imagine this. You stop waiting to be chosen. You choose yourself. And the world finally shifts around that choice. What if the phrase, "I should have known better," is really just grief in disguise? You look back at the moment and wince. You replay the choices, the signs, the gut feeling you ignored, and you scold yourself. Not with kindness, but with shame. As if the person you were then had access to the wisdom you only have now. But that's the trap. You're judging your past self by standards built from the pain that followed. You think wisdom should have come early. That instinct should have been perfect. That knowledge should have arrived uninvited. But learning doesn't whisper. It breaks. It crashes. It demands your attention only after the damage. You want to believe you should have seen it coming, that you were smart enough, cautious enough. But that belief is just your brain begging for control in hindsight. The truth? We don't learn from what we predict. We learn from what surprises us. Self-awareness turns cruel when it forgets where it came from. You didn't know better then. That's why you learned. Wisdom isn't foresight. It's hindsight soaked in healing. You are wiser now because of what hurt you, because of what cracked and didn't kill you, because of the versions of yourself that walked into the fire and came out changed. Regret isn't always a teacher. It's sometimes a jailer. You keep replaying the fall instead of honoring the rise that followed. But that version of you made the best choice they could with what they had, and punishing them now won't make you better. It'll only keep you bitter. What if "I should have known better" is replaced with "now I do"? What if every mistake isn't a mark of failure, but a point of becoming? What if pain wasn't proof you failed, but proof that you were growing all along? What if beginnings don't scare you because they're hard, but because they feel doomed? Imagine opening a blank page, setting your goals, telling yourself, "This time I'll really try." And then one thing goes wrong. You oversleep. You hesitate. You scroll instead of starting. Suddenly your brain screams, "It's already ruined." That tiny misstep spirals into shame, and before anything even begins, it's over. This isn't laziness. It's a form of perfectionist paralysis. Psychology calls it all or nothing thinking, where a small imperfection taints the entire effort. If it's not flawless, it's a failure. You don't allow space for stumbles, so you don't allow space to grow, and every attempt to try again carries the weight of every past attempt that didn't go as planned. Neuroscience shows that when the brain anticipates failure, it triggers the same stress circuits as actual failure. Your amygdala lights up, cortisol floods your body, and motivation shuts down. You freeze, not because you don't care, but because you care so much it paralyzes you. That single wrong step feels like proof you were never good enough to begin with. But what if the first step didn't have to be perfect to be powerful? What if you measured progress not in flawless beginnings, but in your decision to keep walking, even when you trip? Imagine starting badly and continuing anyway. Imagine making room for flawed momentum, because real change doesn't come from perfect starts. It comes from messy, repeated, stubborn restarts. The beginning isn't cursed, it's just human. Maybe your brain learned to fear the start because it believed failure meant rejection. But what if it just meant you were trying? What if the courage wasn't in getting it right, but in starting again every time it goes wrong? What if asking for help doesn't mean you're weak, but that your nervous system has been taught to treat vulnerability like danger? Imagine needing support, the words rising in your throat, then swallowing them whole. Not because you don't want connection, but because asking feels like exposure, like opening a wound someone might judge. This isn't pride, it's protection. Neuroscience shows that early rejection, ridicule, or emotional neglect can wire the brain to fear vulnerability. The amygdala flags it as threat. The nervous system braces for shame. So, you stay silent. You become hyper-independent, thinking strength means isolation. But the truth is, hyper-independence is a trauma response. It's the echo of "I'll do it myself," spoken by someone who once had no choice. And now, even when help is safe, your body reacts like it's not. You flinch from kindness. You apologize for needing anything. But connection is not weakness. It's biology. Humans are wired for interdependence. Even your neurons fire in sync when you feel understood. The antidote to fear isn't more solitude, it's safe relationship. Healing begins when you ask for support, not with confidence, but with trembling honesty. When you risk being seen and find that the right people won't laugh, they'll lean in. And that moment, quiet and terrifying, becomes the beginning of trust. What if feeling deeply wasn't a flaw, but you were taught to treat it like one? Imagine hearing, "You're too emotional," "You overreact," or "Why can't you just toughen up?" Eventually, you start to believe it. You mute your reactions, second-guess your feelings, apologize for tears, and the very thing that connects you to others, your sensitivity, becomes something you hide. This isn't weakness, it's emotional intensity. Psychologists call it high sensitivity. It's not rare. Up to 20% of people process emotion and empathy more deeply. Your nervous system picks up on subtle cues. You sense shifts in mood, in energy, in silence. You feel what others feel, sometimes before they know. But in a world that rewards detachment and speed, your empathy feels like a burden instead of a gift. You try to be normal. You shut down. You fake calm. You smile through overwhelm. But inside, you're burning with unspoken truth. You're not too much. Maybe they feel too little. Sensitivity isn't something to fix. It's something to understand. When you stop shaming your feelings, they become your guide. Sensitivity isn't fragility. It's how you read the unseen and hear what others miss. The world tells you to numb it, but numbness isn't strength. It's disconnection. Empathy and depth aren't flaws. They're your compass. Your softness isn't weakness. It's your superpower. You deserve clarity. You're alive. Life isn't avoiding the fall. It's flying anyway. What if the fear of being left behind isn't about others moving too fast, but about how long you've had to carry things alone? Imagine pausing for one breath, just one moment to gather yourself. And when you look up, everyone else is already gone. New jobs, new cities, new friendships, and you're still standing where you were, heart full, hands shaking, wondering how time chose to leave you behind. This isn't jealousy. It's grief. It's the ache of watching people outgrow spaces you're still trying to survive in. Psychologists call it time displacement, a disconnect between your internal timeline and the world's pace. When trauma, illness, or loss interrupts your path, life doesn't stop with you. People move on, and you're left holding a moment they forgot existed. You start to question your worth. If you mattered, wouldn't they wait? Wouldn't someone look back? You scroll through milestones and wedding photos, promotions and baby announcements, and feel like a ghost watching life through a window. Like your story was skipped. Like you're a memory fading from the very lives you helped build. But here's the truth. Moving slow isn't the same as being lost. Healing has no timeline. Grief has no clock. And the ones who moved ahead, their pace doesn't define your value. You are not a leftover. You are a seed beneath the frost, quiet, unseen, but alive. So imagine this. You stop measuring your life by other people's motion. You honor the quiet space you're in. And you realize some things grow deeper, not faster. Some souls don't rush because they're building something that will last. The world may keep spinning, but that doesn't mean you've fallen off. It means your gravity is still gathering strength. What if the scariest part of healing isn't the pain, but the quiet that follows it? You spent so long in survival mode that chaos became your baseline. The uncertainty, the tension, the next emergency, they gave your nervous system something to do. Now that it's over, the stillness feels wrong. You miss the noise, not because it was good, but because it was familiar. Silence feels like a trick. Calm feels like bait. This is what trauma does. It rewires your sense of normal. Your brain, flooded with cortisol for months or years, starts to expect crisis. And when peace finally arrives, it doesn't feel safe. It feels suspicious. You scan the silence, waiting for it to explode. You feel the stillness and think, this won't last. Because the last time you relaxed, the world broke under your feet. So you fidget. You pick fights. You sabotage calm. Not because you want pain, but because it's the only rhythm you know. Chaos had rules. Predictable chaos was easier than unpredictable peace. And every time things feel too good, too soft, too still, you hold your breath, preparing for the blow. But here's the truth. Stability isn't absence, it's presence. It's the gentle space where you can finally breathe. But to live in it, you have to let go of the belief that chaos is proof you're alive. You say, I'll never feel normal again. But maybe that's because the old version of normal was just constant survival. What if normal doesn't mean going back, but learning how to live forward? What if this ache, this unease, this emptiness is your body detoxing from fear? What if the discomfort you feel now is just your nervous system adjusting to peace? And what if, over time, that strange stillness becomes something new, something whole, something safe? What if the scariest part of life isn't pain, but the absence of a future? Imagine sitting still while everyone talks about plans, promotions, relationships, dreams, and you feel blank. You can't picture yourself 5 years from now. You can barely see 5 days ahead. Hope becomes fog, and in that fog, your mind starts to whisper, maybe there's nothing there. Not because you want to give up, but because you don't know where to go. This is more than apathy. It's called future self-disconnection, a phenomenon where the brain loses its ability to project forward. Psychologists have linked it to depression, trauma, and prolonged stress. When you live in survival mode for too long, the future feels unsafe to imagine. So, your mind shuts it down. No goals, no timelines, no vision. Just gray. You drift, not out of choice, but because your compass stopped pointing anywhere that feels real. Neuroscience shows that the brain's default mode network, responsible for imagining and planning, goes quiet during emotional numbness. The pathways between who you are and who you're becoming get cut off. You're not lazy. You're lost in a neurological freeze response, and that silence gets heavy. You forget how to want, how to hope, how to care about anything more than just getting through the next hour. But here's the truth. The future doesn't have to appear in full. It starts in fragments. One small act of care, one moment of beauty, one kind thought. These aren't the finish line. They're the spark. Imagine if you didn't need to know where you're going, only that you deserve to keep walking. Maybe the future isn't empty. Maybe it's just waiting for you to believe in it again, one breath at a time. What if the belief that you're beyond repair isn't truth, but a scar your brain mistakes for identity? Imagine looking at yourself and not seeing damage, but ruin. You don't cry for help because you've decided no one should waste their time. You think your cracks are proof that healing is no longer possible. But that's not reality. It's trauma logic. Neuroscience shows that prolonged emotional pain can rewire how you see yourself. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for reason, is overridden by the amygdala, the brain's fear center. You begin to filter every memory, every mistake, as evidence that you're broken beyond repair. It's called cognitive distortion, a bias that reinforces pain as identity. But here's the truth. Your worth isn't erased by what hurt you, and cracks aren't signs of weakness. They're survival marks. Neuroplasticity proves the brain can heal, that new thoughts, new behaviors, even new hope can be built, one connection at a time. You don't need to become someone else to be worth saving. You already are. And those who care aren't trying to fix you. They're trying to remind you that even if you feel hollow, even if you can't see it now, there's still something inside you fighting to live. You are not too far gone. You're just too tired to keep carrying this alone. And that's not a flaw. That's a reason to reach. What if, no matter how hard you tried, you always felt late? Imagine pushing yourself all day, meeting goals, checking boxes, only to feel like you're still falling behind. Not just behind others, but behind a version of you that never existed. Time becomes a race you never signed up for, and every moment of stillness feels like proof that you're losing. This isn't laziness. It's a psychological weight called chronophobia, anxiety tied to the passing of time. It makes the clock louder, the days faster, and your sense of worth dependent on what you produce. Even rest becomes stressful. You lie down and think of everything undone. You scroll through achievements you haven't reached. The future races ahead, and you're stuck chasing a life that always moves 2 steps further. But here's the truth. Time isn't linear for the soul. Not everyone blooms on schedule. Growth doesn't follow at the clock. Some people sprint early. Others wander first. What looks like delay is often depth. What looks like falling behind might just be the start of finding your way. You're not slow. You're not late. You're arriving. On your terms. Life isn't a contest of speed. It's made of meaning. Let others rush. Let the world spin. Choose your pace. Behind who? Behind what? You're not behind. You're becoming. Becoming takes time. Your value isn't momentum. It's how deeply you move through each moment. The world rushes, but peace belongs to those who stop and listen. A slower path can mean more meaning, more depth, more strength built with intention. Each breath is progress. What if the feeling of holding everyone back isn't a truth, but a wound misinterpreted as a burden? Imagine being with people you love, and instead of feeling close, you feel like gravity, heavy, anchoring. You watch them dream, move, thrive, and all you see is your own hesitation, your fears, your pace that feels too slow. You begin to believe their lightness dims around you, so you apologize for existing. Quietly, constantly, even without words. Psychologists call this the burden schema, a distorted belief formed early, often by environments where your needs were framed as too much. Over time, you learn to measure your worth by how little space you take up, how few waves you cause, how easy you are to carry. You don't want to shine, you just don't want to slow anyone else down. So, you vanish a little at a time. You pull back from conversations. You say, "I'm fine," instead of asking for help. You shrink your dreams so they won't inconvenience others. You laugh when you're hurting. You pretend you're okay just to keep others comfortable. And slowly, you start to disappear. Not because anyone asked you to, but because you assumed they'd be better off without your full presence. But what if you're not the weight? What if you're the anchor that keeps people steady? What if your presence gives others permission to rest, to speak honestly, to not always have to be okay? You might think you're holding people back when you're actually holding them together. So imagine this. They're not tired because of you. They exhale when you enter. You don't owe anyone invisibility. You owe yourself belonging. And maybe the heaviest thing you carry isn't your presence. It's the false belief that you need to disappear for others to rise. What if the real pain doesn't come from the feeling, but from the fight against it? You start to feel sadness, fear, anger, and the voice kicks in. You shouldn't feel this. This isn't valid. You're overreacting. Be stronger. And now you're not just hurting. You're ashamed for hurting. You're angry at your own anger, afraid of your fear. You build a cage around emotion and then wonder why you feel trapped. This is how the spiral begins. Not because of the emotion itself, but because you've declared it unacceptable. You clench, you push it down. You pretend it's not there. But the truth is, resistance gives pain roots. The more you shame it, the deeper it sinks. What you resist doesn't disappear. It grows. You learned this somewhere. Maybe early, maybe often. That feelings made you weak, that tears made you dramatic. That silence was strength. So now, when emotion knocks, your instinct isn't curiosity, it's control. You try to logic it away. You try to hide it beneath productivity, perfection, or distraction. You try to fix what isn't broken, but simply human. Here's the truth. Emotions aren't enemies. They're messengers, temporary visitors, signals, not sentences. Feeling something deeply doesn't mean you're failing. It means you're alive. Even the painful ones come bearing truth. What if you stopped asking whether the feeling is deserved and started asking what it needs? What if your emotions didn't need to be justified to be welcomed? What if the spiral ends? Not when you suppress the emotion, but when you allow it to pass through, unjudged, unshamed, fully felt. You don't have to earn your feelings. You only have to feel them. And that is not weakness. It's how healing begins. What if the hardest part of connection isn't finding someone, but trusting they won't break you? Imagine standing at the edge of vulnerability, words on the tip of your tongue, stories waiting to be shared, and then silence. You swallow it all back down. Not because you don't want to be known, but because last time, it cost you too much. You opened the door and someone slammed it shut. So now you guard everything and wonder why no one really sees you. This isn't overreaction, it's emotional defense. Psychologists call it learned protection. When openness led to pain, your brain built walls instead of bridges, and those walls get thicker with time. You deflect with humor, you talk in circles, you change the subject. And still, some part of you aches to be understood, to be held in a space that feels safe enough to try again. Neuroscience shows that betrayal and rejection light up the same pain centers as physical injury. Your brain remembers, it flinches, it hesitates, and it whispers, "Don't try that again." You're not cold, you're cautious. You're carrying scars people can't see. And sometimes, you start believing that maybe you're just too complicated to explain. So you keep everything surface level, hoping someone will see through it, yet terrified if they do. But what if the next person doesn't want perfection? They want truth. What if connection doesn't start with full exposure, but with one honest crack in the armor? Imagine showing a glimpse of the real you, not all at once, just enough to let someone stay. Maybe trust isn't a door you fling open. Maybe it's one you open an inch at a time. And maybe, just maybe, someone out there will prove they're safe to let in. Not because you said everything perfectly, but because you showed up at all. What if the past isn't who you are, but a memory your brain keeps replaying because it thinks it's keeping you safe? Imagine walking through life haunted by old versions of yourself. The one who failed. The one who was hurt. The one who stayed silent. Their voices still echo, not because they're true, but because they were loud at the time. Your brain, designed for survival, holds on to pain longer than joy. It does this through a process called emotional tagging, where experiences marked by fear or shame get stored with urgency. It's not trying to punish you, it's trying to prevent you from feeling that way again. But the result is identity confusion. You mistake memory for personality. You say, "I'm still that person," when really, you're just still hearing them. Growth doesn't erase echoes. It just teaches you how to respond to them differently. Neuroplasticity proves that identity is malleable. You're allowed to update your story, even if others remember a different version. You're not lying when you say, "I'm better now." You're evolving. And every time you choose differently, when you speak up, forgive yourself, or stand tall, you're not erasing the past. You're outgrowing it. The old you isn't a prison, it's a foundation. And the voice that once held you back, it can become a reminder of how far you've come, not how far you have to go. What if no matter how much you achieved, it still didn't feel like enough? Imagine completing goals, pleasing others, hitting deadlines, only to lie awake wondering what more you should have done. It's not ambition, it's self-erasure. Worth becomes a task list without end. You measure your value by how much you do, not who you are. Psychologists call this conditional self-worth. It means your sense of being enough only activates when you're productive, impressive, or needed. When you stop moving, the doubt rushes in. You feel guilty for resting, anxious when praised, suspicious of love not earned. Even when praised, you think, they don't know the full story. No matter how much you carry, you believe it wasn't heavy enough to count. You become a master of invisible labor. You over-deliver, overthink, overextend, hoping someday you'll cross the invisible line, where you finally feel like enough. But that line doesn't exist, because the voice saying "not yet" lives inside you, and it never runs out of demands. But worth isn't earned, it's remembered. You were enough before you proved anything, before the checklist, before the pressure. You don't need to be flawless to be valuable. You don't need to be perfect to be loved. You're not a project, you're a person. The most radical thing you can do is stop performing, and just be. Not because you finished everything, but because you're already everything, without trying. That belief you're not enough came from comparison, criticism, or culture, but you don't have to water it anymore. You can choose a new soil, where rest isn't weakness, love isn't earned, and being is enough. Your existence alone carries worth, even now, especially now. What if the belief that it's too late isn't truth, but grief disguised as logic? Imagine standing in front of a door you didn't open, an opportunity you passed, a life you didn't pursue. The silence echoes with what ifs. You tell yourself the time is past. That ship sailed. Everyone else moved forward while you stayed frozen. And now, you believe your chances expired, not because it's true, but because the pain says so. Psychologists call this cognitive filtering, when your mind focuses only on what you missed, not what's still possible. You think in absolutes. I should have started earlier. I wasted too much time. There's no point now. But the truth is, some doors don't lock when you walk by. They wait, quietly, patiently, for you to return. And some paths only become visible after the detour. Think of the artist who didn't pick up a brush until they were 50, the student who returned to school at 60, the person who fell in love at 70. These lives didn't expire, they unfolded. Not late, just different. And your story isn't finished. It's still soft clay in your hands, still warm with potential, still waiting for the touch only you can give it. You aren't behind, you're becoming. And becoming doesn't follow a clock. Your worth doesn't decrease with age or delay. It deepens. Every missed chance taught you something. Every setback prepared you for something else. You're not empty. You're equipped. Not late, you're layered, more alive than you think. So imagine this. It's not too late. Not for joy, not for purpose, not for love, not for change. The path ahead isn't gone. It's just different from the one you imagined. And maybe that difference is where your real story begins. The one written in your own time, not theirs. What if one mistake could hijack your entire life story? Not because it truly defines who you are, but because your brain quietly decided it does. Imagine this: a single moment of failure, an exam failed, a relationship broken, a dream shattered, becomes the anchor that drags your entire identity underwater. Suddenly, every success feels like luck, every compliment a lie. You whisper to yourself, "I've already ruined everything." But that's not truth. That's catastrophic thinking, a cognitive distortion rooted in survival, not reality. It starts in the amygdala, the fear center of your brain, which fuses emotional pain to memory like molten steel. The hippocampus, your memory system, records that pain in high definition while letting joy dissolve into static. That's why you remember the one time you failed more clearly than the dozens of times you tried, helped, or grew. It's not weakness, it's evolution. The brain prioritizes threat to protect, but in doing so, it sometimes protects you from healing, from forgiving, from moving on. But here's the deeper truth. Your brain is not a prison. It's plastic. It rewires. It adapts. Neuroplasticity means that each time you choose compassion over criticism, you are physically reshaping your mind. When you tell yourself, "I am more than this," that's not delusion. It's neurological rebellion. It's proof that the torn chapter isn't the whole book. So imagine your life as a novel. Would you burn it because of one damaged scene? Or would you keep writing, knowing the best chapters might still be ahead? You are not the mistake. You are the author. The story is still yours to shape, and it deserves to be finished, not erased. What if the lie isn't that you're slow, but that speed is the only kind of intelligence? Imagine sitting in a room where others answer fast, speak loud, and fill silence with certainty. And you think, why can't I do that? Your thoughts move slower, deeper. You take longer to respond. You question before you speak. And somewhere along the way, the world taught you to call that broken. You began to confuse quiet thinking with deficiency, depth with delay. But it's not. Psychologists call this cognitive mislabeling, when you mistake your style of processing for a flaw. Intelligence isn't volume, it isn't speed. It's pattern recognition, emotional nuance, depth of insight. And some minds, especially intuitive, sensitive ones, aren't built for instant reaction. They're built for understanding what others miss, for absorbing layers instead of rushing past them. Neuroscience confirms this. People who process more deeply often show delayed verbal responses, not because they don't know, but because they're filtering more data. Your brain might not be noisy, but it's powerful. It's the quiet kind, the kind that watches, remembers, connects dots. And yet, because you don't shine in quick debates or instant answers, you assume you're not smart enough. You forget that brilliance can speak slowly and still be brilliant. But what if your intelligence isn't missing? It's just misread. What if the way you think is exactly what someone else needs to hear? Imagine not needing to shout to be valid. Imagine not equating silence with ignorance. Maybe the loudest minds aren't the wisest. Maybe yours doesn't need to be louder, only trusted. Maybe you've been enough all along, just misunderstood by a world that moves too fast to notice. What if the fear of being forgotten isn't vanity, but the most human ache for permanence in a world that moves too fast? Imagine looking around and wondering if your presence will echo when you're gone. You fear you'll fade, not because you did nothing meaningful, but because memory feels so fragile. This isn't weakness, it's biology. The human brain is wired for social survival. We need to feel seen to believe we exist. When connection is missing, the mind generates existential anxiety. It's called social invisibility, the fear that your absence will matter less than you hoped. Psychologically, it ties to legacy and self-worth. You wonder if the version of you that lived, laughed, hurt, tried, will still exist in someone else's mind when the noise dies down. But here's the truth. Being remembered isn't only about scale, it's about intimacy. A single moment of genuine presence can leave a deeper mark than a lifetime of attention-seeking. The people you touched quietly, the friend you consoled, the stranger you helped without credit, they carry pieces of you. Memory doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it hides in how someone treats others, in choices shaped by love you gave without noticing. So, no, you won't be forgotten. Not by everyone, not entirely. You'll live in gestures, in echoes, in the softest corners of someone's story. And that kind of remembrance, the quiet kind, is the most enduring of all. What if rest didn't recharge you, because guilt got there first? Imagine trying to enjoy a quiet moment, only to feel a sinking pressure in your chest. Joy makes you flinch. Peace feels selfish. Guilt whispers, "You haven't earned this." And just like that, stillness becomes shame. This is more than overthinking. It's internalized productivity, a belief that your worth is tied to output. You've been trained to see rest as a reward, not a right. So you push longer, and when you stop, you spiral. Psychologists call this productivity guilt, anxiety that arises when you're not actively doing. Even when you're burned out, the silence feels like failure. You laugh half-heartedly, sleep shallow, smile, feeling guilty. Your body longs for rest, but your brain demands proof. Stuck, too tired to move, too guilty to stop. It's not laziness, it's survival, distorted by years of associating ease with shame. But here's the truth. Rest is not a luxury. It's your baseline. Your body can't thrive under constant strain. Productivity needs recovery. Joy needs permission. Peace isn't indulgent, it's essential. You don't need to exhaust yourself to deserve stillness. You're allowed to feel and pause. You're not a machine, you're a person. The guilt isn't proof of laziness, it's proof of conditioning. Rest challenges what you were taught about value. Healing begins when you stop apologizing for being, when you treat joy as a birthright. Stillness isn't a mistake, it's what reconnects you to yourself. What if the reason you stopped dreaming isn't that you lost hope, but that someone taught you not to trust it? Imagine trying to picture something better, love, peace, success, and your mind cuts it down before it finishes forming. Not because you don't want it, but because you're convinced you don't deserve it. You've worn pain like skin for so long, joy feels like theft. This isn't weakness, it's survival. Psychologists call this learned helplessness, when trauma trains the brain to expect disappointment. When your nervous system has been wired by betrayal, neglect, or abandonment, dreaming doesn't feel safe. It feels cruel, like setting yourself up for another fall, so you stop. Not because you can't imagine more, but because imagining hurts more than silence. Silence at least doesn't lie. You start dismissing your own longings. You convince yourself that stability is enough, that desire is dangerous, that wanting more is naive. You call it realism. You wear it like armor, but it's really fear wearing a wise face, because somewhere inside, you still ache. Not just for what you lost, but for what you never believed you could reach. But what if the ability to dream again isn't about delusion? It's about recovery. What if dreaming isn't about escaping who you are, but remembering who you were before the world taught you to shrink? You are not too damaged to dream. You are the exact reason dreams exist, to remind you that there is more than survival, that beauty still waits on the other side of the ache, that the future isn't just for the unbroken, it's for the ones who still imagine despite it all. So imagine this. You dare to want. You dare to hope. You dare to breathe into something more. And for once, you let the dream stay and believe it might be real. What if the sentence, "Nothing I say matters," isn't about the world silencing you, but about you silencing yourself before the world even hears you? You open your mouth, but the doubt arrives first. Your voice echoes with fear, with apology, with 1,000 rehearsals. You dilute your truth before anyone else can reject it. This is what happens when you've been dismissed too many times. When speaking up was met with silence, irritation, or worse, mockery. You learn to scan every word before it's spoken, to edit your feelings mid-sentence. You shrink your voice until it disappears. You become fluent in hesitation, fluent in erasing yourself before others get the chance. And over time, it's not just others who stop listening, it's you. You pre-reject your own thoughts. You doubt your own emotions. You tell yourself, it's not that important, or it's not worth the trouble, or they won't understand. But deep down, the ache isn't for attention. It's for permission. Permission to matter, to take up space, to speak without proving your worth first, to say something imperfect and not fear exile. Here's the truth. Your voice is not weak because it's quiet. It's quiet because it's been surviving. And survival is not the same as silence. Silencing yourself was a strategy, but healing means slowly unlearning it. What if the story isn't that nothing you say matters, but that you've been speaking in places too small to hold your truth? What if the people who can hear you fully just haven't found you yet? What if the right space, one that listens, holds, and honors, is still waiting? And what if your words aren't too much, but just enough? You don't need permission to matter. You already do. Your voice was never the problem. The problem was being unheard. What if the truth isn't that you're failing, but that everyone else is hiding it better? Imagine walking into a room and seeing confidence, composure, success. Everyone seems to know what they're doing. Their smiles look real. Their words sound practiced. Meanwhile, you're overanalyzing your posture, your laugh, the way you just said thanks. You think, they've got it figured out. I'm the only one pretending. But you're not. Psychologists call this the spotlight illusion, where you believe everyone notices your flaws more than they actually do. And paired with imposter syndrome, it becomes a trap. You assume others are polished, while you're patched together with panic. But what you see is a highlight reel. What they show is performance. Behind those calm faces are people who also overthink, doubt, freeze, and fear they're not enough. Neuroscience supports this. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for self-evaluation, can become hyperactive under stress, magnifying your awareness of mistakes. You replay moments no one else remembers. You see your cracks in HD, while others blur theirs on purpose. And the more you fake it, the more alien you feel, like you're performing in a language that isn't yours. But what if authenticity isn't a flaw? It's a magnet? What if your vulnerability is what makes you real, and real is what people are quietly starving for? Imagine allowing your mask to slip, and being met with understanding, not judgment. Imagine someone whispering, "Me too." Maybe the ones who seem flawless are just exhausted from holding it together. And maybe you're not the only one pretending, just the only one honest enough to notice that everyone is quietly doing the same. What if the belief that you're a burden isn't truth, but a reflex carved by years of feeling too much in spaces that made you feel like too little? Imagine entering a room and immediately shrinking, softening your voice, adjusting your body, making yourself smaller just to fit. You say sorry when no one asks. You anticipate annoyance before it arrives. This isn't humility, it's self-erasure. Neuroscience shows that when a person has experienced chronic invalidation or conditional acceptance, their brain learns to associate presence with punishment. Your nervous system starts to scan for rejection before it even happens. You internalize the idea that taking up space is an inconvenience. But that isn't reality, it's conditioning. Somewhere along the line, you were taught to apologize for simply existing. And now, even when no one is upset, you carry the echo of being too much. But presence is not a problem. Your existence isn't noise. It's music someone hasn't heard before. Healing begins when you stop shrinking to soothe imagined discomfort, when you let yourself belong without permission, when you speak without softening the truth of your voice. You are not in the way. You are on the path, your own path. And those who truly see you won't ask you to step aside. They'll make room. Because the world doesn't move better without your footsteps. It moves differently because of them. What if every moment of rest felt like betrayal? Imagine finishing a long day, sitting down to breathe, and instead of relief, regret creeps in. You should have done more. You should have worked harder. You should have kept going. Even your breaks feel like mistakes. This isn't motivation. It's shame disguised as drive. A voice wired into your nervous system whispering that effort equals worth. You were taught that doing is surviving, that stillness is failure. So you replay the day not to appreciate what you did, but to catalog what you missed. And no matter how full the day was, it feels empty. Psychologists call this maladaptive perfectionism, the belief that achievement defines identity. It turns rest into guilt, reflection into self-criticism. You don't celebrate wins, you minimize them. You ignore finished tasks and obsess over what's left. And the worst part? The finish line keeps moving. No matter how much you do, it's never enough to silence the voice that says you're still behind. But here's the truth. Rest is part of doing. Pausing is not a flaw in the process, it is the process. Recovery is what lets you return. Reflection is what lets you grow. You don't need to punish yourself to improve. You don't have to earn permission to stop. The shame doesn't come from laziness, it comes from conditioning. You were taught rest must be earned, but breaks aren't betrayals, they're boundaries. You can rest without guilt. You won't fall. You're allowed to be human, not just act. What if feeling like you'll never catch up mentally isn't proof of failure, but a sign of healing and progress? Imagine trying to think clearly, to focus, to remember, but every thought feels like it's moving through fog. Conversations blur. Tasks overwhelm. You try to form a sentence, but it vanishes mid-thought. And the more you push through, the more broken you feel. You start confusing recovery with laziness. You call yourself slow, forgetful, weak. But psychologists call this cognitive fatigue. When your brain has been through trauma, grief, burnout, illness, or long-term stress, its ability to process information changes. You're not imagining the fog. It's real. Executive functions like memory, decision-making, and attention get disrupted. It's not failure. It's injury. And healing from invisible wounds takes visible patience and kindness. You compare yourself to your past sharpness, to others who seem quicker, clearer, more alive. And you spiral, because every forgotten word, delayed decision, or misstep feels like proof that you're falling behind. But healing isn't linear, and slowness doesn't mean stuck. It means your mind is still mending after carrying too much for too long. You don't owe the world quickness. You don't have to perform recovery. What looks like procrastination might be protection. What feels like idleness might be your nervous system catching its breath, begging for stillness, for mercy. So imagine this. You stop measuring your value by speed. You honor the fog as a signal, not a sentence. And in doing so, you begin to clear space, not to catch up, but to meet yourself where you truly are, fully, gently, and without shame, because catching up is an illusion. But being here, that's real. What if the scariest question isn't what's out there, but can I trust what's inside? You start to question everything, your thoughts, your memories, your instincts, and slowly the ground beneath you softens. You're no longer sure what's real, not because reality changed, but because your ability to feel certain quietly disappeared. This is what happens when truth feels flexible, when people rewrite stories, when gaslighting reshapes your past, when trauma fractures your trust in perception itself. One day you're confident, the next you're second-guessing your own reflection. You begin to doubt your reactions, your feelings, your sense of time. Even your own voice feels distant. Even your body feels like a costume. Everything looks familiar, but wrong. You ask others, was that real? More than you admit. You search for validation in every face, every conversation, every silence, because inside, there's a war between what you experienced and what the world allowed you to believe. And sometimes, the worst part isn't that no one believed you, it's that they made you stop believing yourself. But here's the truth. Just because someone else doesn't agree doesn't make your experience false. Just because memory is slippery doesn't mean it's meaningless. Your confusion isn't weakness. It's evidence that your mind tried to protect you the only way it could, by blurring the unbearable. And slowly, gently, that fog can lift. What if not knowing what's real is actually a step toward truth? What if the disorientation is just a sign that your brain is rebuilding? Carefully, slowly, honestly. Reality may feel broken now, but that doesn't mean you are. The compass is still inside you. It's just relearning where to point. What if sleep doesn't bring peace, but becomes the loneliest part of your day? Imagine lying in bed, lights off, silence loud. You close your eyes hoping for rest, but instead, your thoughts arrive sharper. Regrets line up like ghosts. Worries gather at the foot of your bed. You scroll until your fingers hurt, delaying the moment your brain is alone with itself. Because sleep doesn't feel safe. It feels like a trap. This isn't laziness or insomnia. It's a trauma-linked pattern called sleep avoidance. Psychologists have found that people with anxiety, PTSD, or unresolved grief often fear the vulnerability of sleep. When your mind's been your enemy all day, why would you surrender to it in darkness? So you delay the spiral by staying awake, hoping that numbness will beat reflection. You binge shows, reread messages, even fear the moment you start to drift, because that's when the past sneaks in. Neuroscience shows that REM sleep activates emotional processing centers. Your brain relives unresolved memories, stressors, pain. That's why some dreams feel like punishment. It's not your imagination. It's your mind trying to process what you haven't had space to heal. But avoidance deepens the loop. Less sleep means more emotional reactivity. You become exhausted but restless, desperate to escape but afraid of where rest might take you. But what if sleep wasn't the problem, but the message? What if your nightmares aren't trying to scare you, but show you what's still hurting? Imagine meeting those dreams not with fear, but curiosity. You're not weak for struggling to rest. You're exhausted from fighting a war your body still remembers. Maybe peace doesn't begin with deep sleep, but with a gentler way of being awake. What if the version of you they love isn't false, but the only one you've ever felt safe enough to show? Imagine entering every room wearing a mask, charming, agreeable, composed. You get affection, but it feels like a transaction. You think, if they saw the real me, they'd leave. This isn't deception, it's protection. Psychology calls it fawning, a trauma response where you mold yourself to earn safety. Over time, the mask sticks. You start confusing the performance with identity. And when love arrives, it never touches you, only the character you've created. So you feel alone, even when surrounded. The nervous system remembers what it cost to be rejected, so it adapts. You become what people want, not what you are. But the danger is this. Eventually, even you forget who's underneath. And the more praise you get for the mask, the more terrified you become of removing it. But here's the truth. People can't love you fully if you don't let them see you. And no mask, no matter how polished, can protect you from the ache of being unseen. The path back isn't easy. It requires peeling layers slowly, risking moments of discomfort for glimpses of truth. But real connection lives beyond the performance. And when someone finally meets the you beneath the mask and chooses to stay, that's not validation, that's freedom. You are not loved because you pretend. You're loved in spite of it. And the real you is still in there, waiting to be chosen. What if your greatest struggle wasn't the world, but your own thoughts? Imagine trying to focus, breathe, or sleep, only to be pulled into a current of spiraling thoughts you didn't invite. They arrive without warning. Doubt, fear, regret. And no matter how hard you fight, they don't listen. You don't think your thoughts. They think you. This is what it's like when your mind becomes the storm. You try to resist, but every effort makes the spiral tighter. You start to believe the thoughts must be true because they're loud. Psychologists call this cognitive fusion, when your identity fuses with whatever your mind says. If your brain says you're failing, you feel it. Even if nothing's wrong outside, it's chaos inside. And the harder you try to silence the noise, the more power it seems to gain. Because what you resist persists. But here's what your mind won't tell you. You don't have to control the storm to survive it. Anchor beneath the waves. You are not your thoughts. You are the witness. The awareness watching the storm pass. Intrusive thoughts aren't proof of weakness. Your brain evolved to scan for danger, even when there isn't any. Stillness isn't found in force. It begins with permission. You don't have to fix every thought to feel peace. You just have to stop believing it all. Thoughts are weather, some dark, some bright. But none define you. You don't fail by thinking. You heal by witnessing. The storm returns, and so will your strength. Not from fighting, but from learning to float. You're not losing control. You're learning to let go and still exist. What if the walls around you weren't built by enemies, but by the younger you who just wanted to survive? Imagine carving out a safe space, moment by moment, avoiding risk, silence, confrontation, hope. You created rules. Don't speak unless invited. Don't love unless sure. Don't try unless certain. At first, it saved you. It kept the chaos out. But now, it's keeping you in. Psychologists call this a self-protective schema, when behaviors designed for survival become habits of self-sabotage. You set boundaries not just around others, but around yourself. You clipped your wings before anyone else could. You chose predictability over passion, control over curiosity, numbness over pain, and in doing so, you convinced yourself that silence was strength and detachment was maturity. Now, you call it discipline. But it's really fear and armor. You avoid connection and call it independence. You silence your desires and call it wisdom. You manage everything so tightly that spontaneity feels like danger. You've become so good at protecting yourself that you've forgotten how to let yourself live. But here's the truth. The cage isn't locked. It never was. The key has always been within you, and the rules you wrote in fear can be rewritten in love. You are not betraying the past version of you by growing beyond them. You're honoring their strength by proving they don't have to guard you forever. So imagine this. The door is open. The air is unfamiliar, but it's fresh. You step out, not all at once, but with trembling certainty. You feel the breeze, the weight shifts, and you begin again. Not as the one who hides to survive, but as the one who dares to be seen to truly live. What if missing who you used to be isn't weakness, but love? You look back at that old version of yourself, the one who laughed easier, moved freer, believed more, and your chest aches. Not because they were perfect, but because they were yours. You remember their dreams, their hope, even their mistakes, and it feels like you're grieving someone you used to know. This is what change does. It transforms quietly, slowly, and one day, you wake up in a different skin, with new scars, heavier thoughts, and a voice that trembles when it used to sing. You didn't notice the goodbye happening in real time. You didn't realize that growing meant grieving. Now you're left with fragments, photos, echoes, memories that sting because they mattered. You tell yourself you should be stronger by now. That nostalgia means weakness, that looking back means regression. But here's the truth. Grief isn't just for death. It's for shifts, for seasons, for versions of ourselves we had to shed to survive. The person you were didn't fail. They simply faded to make space for who you needed to become. You miss who you were because you loved who you were, even if they were naive, even if they made mistakes. That version carried you through heartbreak, through doubt, through joy you no longer feel but still remember. That version deserves a proper goodbye, not shame, not dismissal. Love. What if missing them is part of honoring them? What if remembering who you were is how you build who you're becoming? You're not broken for grieving. You're remembering. You're reconnecting. And remembrance isn't weakness. It's the first step toward wholeness. Let yourself look back. Just don't forget to also look forward. What if the fear isn't making the wrong choice, but realizing none of the choices feel right? Imagine standing at a crossroads, not with one path and one doubt, but with 100 paths and a single haunting question. What if none of these lead anywhere? You think, if you pick wrong, you'll ruin everything. But what's worse is the quiet suspicion that no matter what you pick, it won't feel like home. This isn't indecision. It's cognitive overload. Psychology calls it decision paralysis, when the brain becomes overwhelmed by too many uncertain outcomes. You're not stuck because you don't care. You're stuck because you care too much. You spiral not from fear, but from too many exits that all echo maybe. You don't want perfect. You just want peace, something steady enough to quiet the noise, long enough to hear your own voice again. Neuroscience shows that under stress, the brain's prefrontal cortex, responsible for weighing outcomes, can short-circuit. Doubt floods your system. Regret shadows your thinking. You pre-live failures that haven't happened and mourn alternate lives you'll never touch. The more you try to think clearly, the more your thoughts twist around each other like vines. You chase the illusion of clarity and end up drowning in hesitation. But what if there isn't one right path, just the one you decide to walk? What if peace doesn't come from choosing the best option, but from choosing fully? Imagine accepting that maybe all paths echo maybe, but some still lead to growth, joy, and meaning. The future isn't a trick. It's a story you're allowed to write badly at first. And maybe every step, even the wrong ones, are still progress, because you dared to move at all. Maybe it's not about certainty, it's about momentum. What if the fear of being fully known isn't about others, but about what you've learned to believe about yourself? Imagine opening up to someone, and before they can flinch, you pull away. You think, if they knew it all, they'd leave. So you leave first. Not physically, but emotionally. You hide behind jokes, change the subject, distract. It's not manipulation, it's protection. Psychologically, this is rooted in shame-based attachment, the belief that love must be earned by hiding the unacceptable. Your nervous system, shaped by rejection or criticism, equates exposure with danger. Vulnerability feels like standing naked in a storm. So you wear layers, personas, performances, pleasing. And when someone gets too close, your alarm bells go off. Not because they've done anything wrong, but because your inner world has been unvisited for so long, it feels haunted. But here's the truth. Being fully known is terrifying precisely because it's powerful. It threatens the lie that you are unworthy. Real connection doesn't require perfection. It requires presence. And yes, some people may leave, but others won't. And their staying will rewrite everything. You don't have to hand over your soul all at once. Start small. A truth. A fear. A moment. Let someone see you, then watch what happens when they don't run. That's not weakness, that's healing. That's what it means to finally stop leaving yourself. What if exhaustion wasn't just in your body, but in your identity? Imagine waking up tired, moving through the day in slow motion, every task feeling heavier than it should. You weren't always like this. There was a time when energy felt natural, when trying didn't take convincing. But now, even simple things feel distant. The fatigue isn't just physical, it's existential. This is what burnout does when it lingers too long. It rewires your self-image. You stop saying I'm tired and start saying I can't. You don't rest, you shut down. You lose interest in what used to light you up. And worst of all, you start to believe that this numbness is who you are, that your spark didn't just dim, it disappeared. Psychologists call this emotional exhaustion. It's the final stage of burnout. Not stress, but emptiness. Not overwork, but disconnection. And when you're here, advice feels insulting. Just push through, they say. But how do you push through a fog that lives inside you? Here's the truth. Your tiredness isn't weakness, it's a signal. Your body is asking for a pause, your mind is asking for kindness. You are not lazy, you are depleted. And that's not a moral failure, it's a human one. Recovery doesn't start with motivation, it starts with permission. Permission to go slow, to not be okay, to rebuild without rushing. You don't need your old self. Maybe you're becoming slower, wiser, someone who listens when the body speaks, someone who knows exhaustion isn't inadequacy. Rest restores you. What if the silence you feel isn't because you're unworthy, but because the world isn't listening with real ears? Imagine speaking, clearly, honestly, even desperately, and the reply is static. Blank eyes, empty nods, replies that miss the point entirely. You're not quiet. You're unheard. You begin to wonder if your words are too soft, or if the world is just too loud, too distracted, too caught up in itself to actually care. Psychologists call this emotional invalidation, when your inner truth is ignored, minimized, or misunderstood. It doesn't just hurt, it rewrites your sense of visibility. Over time, you stop reaching out. You test people with hints instead of full truths. You water down your pain. You edit your joy. Because when no one really listens, vulnerability starts to feel like exposure without protection. You armor your silence. You ghost your own voice. You could scream in a crowded room and still feel invisible. Not because you don't matter, but because people hear what they expect, not what you say. You shrink not from weakness, but exhaustion. You've been shouting into pillows disguised as people. You've performed being fine so well that they forgot to ask twice. But here's what's real. Your voice still holds power, even if others fail to reflect it back. The sound of truth isn't measured by volume, it's measured by courage. And just because someone doesn't hear you doesn't mean you didn't speak. It means they weren't ready, or they weren't safe. So imagine this. You stop speaking to be understood. You start speaking to be free. You write your truth in your own ink. And one day, someone will hear it and echo back not with noise, but with recognition. Until then, don't stop speaking. Even if the world's still catching up to your frequency. What if the reason you can't relax isn't because something's wrong, but because your body was trained to expect it? You walk through life holding your breath, clenching invisible muscles, scanning for the next impact. Calm doesn't feel safe. It feels like a setup. Silence isn't peace. It's the pause before the blow. A smile feels like the moment before betrayal. A quiet day feels like the lead-in to disaster. This is what chronic stress and trauma do. They turn your nervous system into a radar. Every quiet moment becomes suspicious. Every happy day feels borrowed. You can't enjoy ease, because ease once meant vulnerability, and vulnerability led to pain. So you brace, constantly, even when nothing's coming, even when you're alone, even when things are good. You learn to live like a soldier in peacetime, twitching at shadows, expecting betrayal and softness. You don't call it fear, you call it being prepared. But preparation without rest is just exhaustion in armor. You don't rest because rest feels dangerous. You don't trust comfort because comfort has fooled you before. But here's the truth, you weren't born this way. This was learned. This was wired by experience, by hurt, by survival. And that means it can be unwired. Not quickly, not all at once, but gently. Through presence, through breath, through safety you don't have to earn. Bracing doesn't stop the pain. It only postpones the healing. It keeps you locked in a waiting room with no exit. Real strength isn't hypervigilance. It's allowing yourself to exhale. It's letting the body learn that the worst isn't always next. What if calm isn't the warning? What if it's the arrival? What if the quiet isn't the trap, but the truth? And what if the next chapter isn't another disaster, but the place where you finally learn to rest? What if you weren't disappearing on purpose, but simply dissolving from neglect? Imagine becoming quieter day by day. You stop reaching out. Stop adding comments in group chats. Stop showing up to places that once felt familiar. Not because you want to vanish, but because it starts to feel like no one would notice if you did. You sit in a room full of people and feel like a missing person standing in plain sight, waving invisibly. This isn't attention-seeking, it's emotional starvation. Psychologists call it perceived social invisibility, when you believe your presence carries no weight. It's not about needing praise or applause. It's about needing to feel real, to feel seen. But when connection dries up, your identity starts to fade with it. You become a ghost in your own life, haunting spaces where you once belonged, wondering if anyone would notice the chill in the air. Neuroscience shows that consistent social neglect can impact the brain's self-referencing regions, altering your sense of self-worth and reducing motivation to engage. When your voice echoes into silence too many times, the brain begins to believe silence is what it deserves. So you withdraw further, hoping someone will come find you. And when no one does, it confirms your worst fear, that your fading doesn't even register. You begin to question if you were ever really there. But what if your vanishing act isn't weakness, but a signal? What if pulling away isn't about giving up, but testing if anyone sees the cliff you're on? Imagine someone noticing, not because you yelled, but because they were listening for the quiet. Maybe you're not asking for help loudly. Maybe you're asking with absence, and maybe that still deserves an answer. Maybe the softest cries are the ones that need hearing the most. What if the reason you can't let yourself be happy isn't because you don't want joy, but because your nervous system mistakes it for danger? Imagine a good moment arriving, love, luck, laughter, and instead of relaxing, you tighten. Joy knocks, but you don't open the door. You spiral with suspicion, scanning for what might go wrong. This isn't self-sabotage, it's protection. When happiness was followed by hurt in your past, your brain formed a pattern. Good things don't last. Neuroscience calls this negativity bias. Your mind holds on to pain longer than peace, assuming it's safer to expect the worst. Over time, joy becomes a warning sign. You brace for the fall. You reject hope before it can disappoint you. But the truth is, happiness isn't a trick. It's a risk. And yes, that means you might lose it, but not feeling it at all is a greater loss. Your nervous system is trying to protect you from heartbreak, not realizing it's also shielding you from beauty. Healing starts when you allow joy in small doses. A laugh you don't question, a compliment you let land, a moment you fully live in without plotting its end. You won't learn to trust happiness all at once, but every time you feel it and stay in your body, stay in your breath, you show your mind it's okay to feel good without fear. Joy isn't the enemy. It's the proof you're still alive enough to receive it. What if existing started to feel like a job you never applied for? You wake up, go through the motions, do what's needed, but the spark is gone. You smile out of habit, work out of duty, rest only to recharge for more enduring. There's no joy in the doing, just survival. It's not that anything's wrong, it's that everything is flat. You're not crashing, you're coasting, not panicking, just numb. Psychologists call this emotional blunting. When your system gets so overwhelmed that it shuts off feelings to protect itself. You still function. You still show up. But nothing feels real. You've adapted to survival mode so long that it's become your baseline. And the worst part? It's invisible. People say you're doing great. You nod and agree. But deep down, you're not living. You're lasting. Existing becomes endurance. Every breath feels like preparation for the next effort. Every quiet moment feels like a pause in a race you can't quit. But survival was never meant to be your final form. It was meant to be a bridge, one you eventually cross. Your body learned to protect you, but now it's safe to feel again, to notice, to be present. You don't have to leap into joy. Just soften into life. Let the small things in. Sunlight, sweetness, breath. You are not weak for needing more than survival. You are human. And there is more waiting than just the next task. Healing isn't always transformation. Sometimes it's rest. Sometimes it's letting joy in. You've endured. But you're not just endurance. Your story is more than survival. It starts now. What if your self-doubt isn't a flaw, but a scar from trusting too deeply in places that hurt you? Imagine standing at the edge of a decision, heart pounding, instincts flickering. And instead of clarity, you feel panic. You don't trust the signal. You hesitate. You ask others. You replay every possibility until you're paralyzed. And deep down, you wonder, what's wrong with me? Psychologists call this decision paralysis, often born from trauma, betrayal, or chronic invalidation. When your past choices led to pain, or were blamed for it, you start seeing your own intuition as dangerous. Even joy feels suspicious. You become your own interrogator. Every impulse must be questioned, every emotion cross-examined. You don't just doubt your choices, you doubt your ability to choose at all. You call it being careful, but it's really fear dressed as logic. Because somewhere in the past, you were punished for being wrong, or for being right in a world that didn't want your truth. So now, instead of listening inward, you outsource your certainty. And when no one can give it to you, you spiral deeper. You wait for signs, for proof, for guarantees that never come. But what if your instincts aren't broken? They're just buried. What if your doubt is a learned reflex, not a permanent truth? You don't need to be perfect to be trustworthy. You just need to rebuild the bridge between your voice and your value. And that begins not with big leaps, but with small, quiet yeses. So imagine this. You pause, not to fear your intuition, but to meet it with gentleness. You listen, not for certainty, but for familiarity. You treat hesitation not as a warning, but as an invitation to get curious. And with every small choice honored, you begin to believe again, not just in what you decide, but in who's doing the deciding. What if the hardest part of healing isn't the pain, but the belief that it was pointless? You start to rebuild, to breathe, to open, and then a voice whispers, "It'll just happen again." So you freeze, you armor up, you stop reaching forward because the past keeps dragging you back. This is what fear does when it wears memory as a mask. You begin to treat experience like prophecy. A betrayal becomes a warning. A heartbreak becomes a forecast. The brain doesn't know how to separate danger from déjà vu, so it loops the pain, hoping it'll protect you this time. You're not reliving the past, you're reliving the fear of the past. You prepare to bleed where you once healed. You flinch before anything touches you. You sabotage hope before it dares to arrive. Not because you're broken, but because you're exhausted. You're tired of falling for the same story. You start to see every smile as the start of a goodbye. You stop letting people in. Not because you want to, but because your heart still limps from the last fall. But here's the truth. The past is a teacher, not a fortune teller. What happened before can inform you, but it doesn't own you. Yes, it could happen again, but so could growth, so could love, so could trust. And the risk of pain is not proof that you're doomed. It's proof that you still care. And caring means you're still alive. What if it'll just happen again is a fear, not a fact? What if the wound doesn't define the outcome, but your courage does? What if your future doesn't echo your past, but rewrites it? You don't need to pretend you're unafraid. You only need to move anyway, even if you tremble, even if you doubt. Because healing isn't about trusting the world, it's about trusting yourself to survive it, again and again and again. What if the problem isn't you, but the way this world was wired? Imagine walking through a day where everything feels too sharp, too fast, too loud. The lights hurt, the noise drills, the pace feels like a race you never signed up for. You try to keep up, but every interaction scrapes against your nervous system like sandpaper. You spiral, not because you're weak, but because the world feels like it was built for someone else entirely. This isn't imaginary. Psychologists link this to sensory processing sensitivity, a trait found in people often labeled as too sensitive. You notice subtleties others miss. Emotions hit harder. Injustice feels unbearable. And in a world obsessed with productivity, confidence, and noise, that depth is often mistaken for fragility. You try to blend in, but end up fading out. Neuroscience shows that highly sensitive brains process stimuli more deeply. activating empathy and awareness at levels others don't reach. But it comes at a cost. Overstimulation, anxiety, burnout. You're not broken. You're just tuned to a different frequency, one that this loud, fast-moving world rarely honors. So you wonder if you were meant to be here at all. But what if sensitivity isn't a flaw, but a signal? What if your overwhelm points not to dysfunction, but to a deeper intelligence, one attuned to what matters beneath the noise? Imagine a world that moved slower, spoke softer, valued depth over volume. Maybe you weren't made wrong. Maybe the world just forgot how to hold people like you. And maybe your softness is exactly what it's starving for, but doesn't know how to ask. Maybe you're not fading. You're translating a world that's forgotten how to listen. What if questioning reality isn't delusion, but a defense mechanism your brain uses when pain becomes too constant to bear? Imagine waking up and nothing feels solid. Conversations blur. Joy feels distant. You look around and wonder, am I really here? This is called derealization, and it's real. It's your brain disconnecting from the world to protect you from emotional overload. When trauma, grief, or chronic stress stack too high, your nervous system detaches. Doubt becomes safer than belief. You begin to analyze everything, your thoughts, your surroundings, your identity, not for answers, but for escape, because believing in something real means accepting the pain that comes with it. So, your mind builds a simulation instead, a mental glass wall between you and everything that could hurt you. But here's the truth. Feeling disconnected doesn't mean you're broken. It means your brain is trying to survive. The challenge is remembering that the numbness is temporary, that you can feel again without being consumed. You ground yourself with sensation, sound, movement. You anchor to the smallest real things, a breath, a blink, a heartbeat. Reality isn't proven by certainty. It's reclaimed through presence. You don't need to believe in everything all at once. Just trust the next moment, and then the next, until the walls thin, until the world becomes tangible again, not because it was never real, but because you're finally safe enough to return to it. What if freedom didn't feel like flight, but like falling? Imagine the door finally opens, the routine breaks, the pressure lifts, you get what you said you wanted, and yet you freeze. Freedom terrifies you. Because you've lived inside loops for so long, you forgot how to walk without chains. This is the hidden cost of survival mode. You build routines to protect yourself. You follow rules to stay safe. Even if those rules cage you, at least they're familiar, predictable. So when the cage disappears, you don't run, you hesitate. Not because you're weak, but because freedom requires skills you forgot you had. Choice, trust, self-direction. Psychologists call this learned helplessness, the internalized belief that control is dangerous or futile. When you've been stuck long enough, you stop believing in exits, even when they appear. You second-guess joy. You mistrust peace. You sabotage the door before it opens all the way. But here's the truth. Freedom isn't something you wait to feel ready for. It's something you remember how to hold. One small decision at a time, one risk, one breath. You don't need to sprint. You just need to move without asking permission. Because the chains were never moral. They were survival. And you're allowed to outgrow them. You don't owe your past a reenactment. You don't have to earn your exit. You just have to believe that your story can change direction. And then, let it. The cage kept you safe, but safety isn't peace. Peace moves. Peace breathes. Hesitation isn't brokenness. It's healing. Freedom may feel strange or quiet, but that quiet is yours now. And in it, your life begins to sing again.